Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we're here for my LPL week number 4 overview and analysis video in the spring split. We are back. The Lunar New Year break is over. We are covering the LPL again. Obviously, we've got a lot of games to cover in today's video. This is one of the big super weeks. Not only do we get the super days on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday like we've kind of become accustomed to at the beginning of this year in the LPL, but we get them on Monday and Thursday as well. And so 5 days with potentially 9 games in them. It's a lot to cover, so I don't want to waste too much time in the intro. If you are excited, let me know down in the comment section below. What did you think of week number 4 of everybody coming back from the LPL? I certainly have some thoughts that might definitely be a little bit different than maybe the consensus you're seeing on Reddit or on Twitter, as I think people have become accustomed to on this channel, but would love to know you guys' thoughts on everything down in the comment section below. Of course, if you want to know my thoughts on everything that's happened this year in the LPL so far, you can check out the playlist that's linked up in the iCard right now, but without further ado, let's jump right into the action. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I'll be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything that happened in week 4 into a nice, neat little bow. Of course, I will also be updating my power rankings from number 1 to number 17. Just my personal opinions. Of course, they will also be listed throughout the video next to all the team names from what they were after week 3, so we're going to get a better idea of where a lot of these teams are sitting, and especially after 4 weeks, we definitely have a good idea of, I think, where these teams are in terms of, are they good, are they bad, or are they somewhere in the middle? But without further ado, let's jump right into our first series, our day number 1, and of course, day 1 was our first super day of the week, so kicking off our first 3 series day, it was a matchup between Ninjas in Pyjamas and Ultra Prime, 4-1 versus 1-4, and it kind of went as you would expect. Ninjas in Pyjamas is going to be able to pick up the win, but it certainly wasn't as clean as what they had been showing for the most part this year. I do want to say I am very confused about a lot of the conversation surrounding Ninjas in Pyjamas, surrounding, you know, this team in general, because they're looked at so negatively. You basically look at any post-match thread, or you look at any, you know, Twitter thread about Ninjas in Pyjamas, and it's about how they are a fraud team, about how they've only beaten bad teams, and, you know, people point to this game number 3, and it's like, this is the fraud performance, Ultra Prime bad, Ninjas in Pyjamas, it must be bad because they didn't destroy them, and I don't know if I agree with that even a little bit. I think it's a very weird sentiment to have because they've been so good in their first couple of series. Did they struggle a bit more than maybe you would have expected against Ultra Prime? Yeah, like you probably would have wanted them to blow them out. They dropped a game in pretty convincing fashion in game number 2, and, you know, game number 3 certainly wasn't a blowout by any means. They had to kind of struggle and fight their way to win that game, but I don't know, this was their worst series of the year by far. Games 2 and 3 are the 2 worst games that they've played this year by far, and so I'm not going to freak out too much over 2 games coming back from the Lunar New Year break. This team's been very good at the beginning of this split. It's just a very weird conversation. Mostly because the team, and this isn't just because of the players, I promise, but the team that I compare them to is 2023 OMG. I think this team plays almost identical and is about as consistent as 2023 OMG. To see the conversation around NIP be mostly, oh, this team is frauds and they're going to fall off, whereas last year it's like, OMG are such fun underdogs, I hope they make Worlds. It's very strange to me. I get it's because, you know, players on this team are a little bit more veteran. It's not this young upstart team, but this is basically the same team that OMG was last year in terms of how they play the game. So just very, very strange in my opinion. But let's talk about what actually happened in this series. Player of the series for me is going to go to Rookie. You know, you can kind of point out maybe some micro mistakes that he made throughout this series. The Hui could have absolutely been better in game number 2, lost a lot of pressure early, and Yuikai did a very good job of capitalizing on that. You do want to give a lot of credit to Hacker in that instance, but the Azir in game number 1 team fighting was incredibly important, and obviously the team fights down the stretch on the Wukong mid in game number 3 were very influential. Wukong mid, certainly not something we're seeing anywhere else in the world, but we kind of saw the value of it here. Laning phase is going to be a little bit tougher, especially into something like a Kali that can punish you a bit more, but, you know, he's got a good early game scaling, and generally speaking, his team fighting is fantastic. Like, it's always been what Wukong is really good at, so I understand the thought process. I've seen Wukong mid in a couple of different circumstances, and this is a good pick. I don't think it's like a great pick. I think it's, you know, situational, but we saw the value of it in this game. I think the rest of the team played all right. You wanted to see a bit more out of the top side of the map. Aki, in particular, I think had probably his worst series of the year up until this point. I'm a big Aki fan. I thought he was phenomenal for OMG last year, arguably at times the best player on that team, and while he hasn't been perfect at the start of this split, he certainly certainly hasn't been the dominant takeover threat that he was last year in 2023. He's still been good, and just because he was maybe not as good as Hacker for a lot of this series, I'm not going to freak out. I think he'll be fine. Shanji was not like dominant. He got to play Udyr and K'Sante, and none of the really carry-oriented picks, so I'm not worried. And Foduk and Zhuo, they're going to make mistakes. Foduk died a lot being too far forward, but that's just who he is. That's what he does. It's always been who Foduk is, even at his best. He's having probably the best start to a split he's ever had. You know, as somebody who's been super low on Foduk over the course of his career, I think he's been fine. And then Zhuo was good, I would say generally, especially on the Milio in game number 3 in this series. And so I'm not super worried about NIP. It's their worst series of the year, and they were still able to win it. And that's pretty good, in my opinion. So I'm not freaking out. But for Ultra Prime, you know, this seems better than I think anybody could have expected them to be. I think everybody had them pegged as being the worst team in the LPL going into the year. They just have not been that. They are a lot more competitive than that. There still are problems, but it's the mid-jungle that I think is the most encouraging. It's Hacker and Uakai who I think have really started to develop a nice synergy together. Hacker is one of those players that always gets a bad rep, but as I've said on this channel, he's going to consistently be somewhere between like the 12th or 13th to like the 15th best jungler in the league. He's never really going to be the worst. He's going to have performances where he looks like the worst, but for the most part, over the course of a split, it equalizes out to being a below average jungler. But, you know, he's going to have good games. He's going to have good games every once in a while. He can win, especially if he's given early prio on something like Xin Zhao, like he was in game number 2. Great game from him. Uakai has been very consistent for this team. I actually think he's really starting to get back into his groove that he was on Invictus. I don't think it's going to be perfect for him, but it's certainly been good. Doggo and Jue are whatever, like they're kind of nothing down in the bot lane, but dud of the series is going to go to Decade in the top lane. It was really hard to, you know, find a dud of the series here. I don't really think anybody played all that bad over the course of this series for Ultra Prime, but it really was the Jax game in game 1 where Decade felt the most outclassed. He wasn't really all that bad on the Aatrox. In fact, he was pretty good on the Aatrox in game 3, was pretty solid on the Gnar in game 2, but I didn't know who else to give this to. Honestly, everybody on Ultra Prime played fine, and I don't think anybody on NIP played horrendous. Like, they didn't throw the game or anything. If anything, it could have gone to maybe Foduk or Shanji, but, like, they really didn't play all that bad. It's just one of those... I think all 10 players in this series kind of showed good things generally, and I think that's a good thing, more so a good thing for Ultra Prime than it is a bad thing for Ninjas in Pyjamas. Obviously, if they continue to play like this, you can be a little bit concerned, but right now I'm not freaking out. This was a good series for both of them. Ultra Prime definitely better than we could have anticipated, and Ninjas in Pyjamas is a team that I'm expecting to compete for a top 4 spot. They've been in my top 4 basically since the end of week 1, and so, you know, generally I'm positive coming away from this series. And then moving on to our second series of day 1, and I was really, really excited for this one. Two teams that I think are very close to each other in terms of how I feel about them. Anyone's Legend taking on OMG. And AL is going to pick up a really strong 2-1 win here. They dropped game number 1, but it's fine. They're able to rebound and recover for a really nice game 2 and game 3 win where they really were able to control the map in a lot of different circumstances. I thought they played really well in this series. And, you know, I've been looking for a reason to either move someone like AL up, you know, a team that's kind of on this borderline of somewhere between like 11 and, you know, 14. Give me a reason to like move you into the top 10 because, man, the bottom 3 in the top 10, like 8, 9, and 10 are just not great teams at the current moment. And I've been waiting for a reason to put somebody else in there. This is a pretty good reason. OMG has not been strong at the start of this split. They've been inconsistently fine, but they really haven't been great. They've had good moments, and I'll talk about that in this series. They still had them in this series, but AL was the better team here, and that was very, very clear. Player of the series for me is going to go to Shanks in the mid lane. He's been inconsistently very good this split. I was a really big fan of his on WE. Maybe not as big as some of the other people on Reddit who just continuously tout him, but I thought he was pretty good, a very interesting prospect, certainly somebody who I thought was better than the teammates around him for a long time on, you know, like the 0-16 WE team, obviously, but, you know, he got a chance to play with a good team last year, and he really stepped up. He's a solid mid laner, you know, in that cluster of mid laners from, like, number 5 to number 11 that are all very good at this level, but he's been inconsistent, I would say, to start this split. The 2 losses that they've had in series, he's played really bad, but the wins that they've had, he's actually been really good. That's kind of just been how it's gone, and he's kind of been the temperature check for AL. It's really nice to see him play well here. Azir in game 2 was amazing. That's really the standout game for me and the reason he's getting player of the series, but he was still very relevant on the Karma. In game number 3, that pick is just so strong right now. I wouldn't leave it up if I were enemy teams against basically anybody, but he played well in my opinion. I want to give a shout out to Hope and Kale as well. Kale has really kind of re-cemented himself at the beginning of this split. I was a massive, massive, massive fan of his in the LCK. Anybody who follows the channel knows he was a massive channel darling for me, and so it's nice to see him get another shot here on AL and actually live up to the billing. He's been very good, especially in lane. He's a very dominant early 2v2 player. He knows how to be able to generate leads in the 2v2 isolated lane phase, and Abel had a really rough series. A lot of that was Kale playing really well and being able to shut down some of his more aggressive picks. He got to play basically his 3 best champions. Abel did on the other side of this matchup, and Kale, I think, was able to do a really good job of shutting down all of those. Hope obviously did a good job of following up, but it was Kale and Shanks that I think stood out for me. I thought Harry was also really good in this series, maybe the best he's played all year. I've been really low on what he has offered in 2024, and I was a lot lower on him in 2023 as well. He's a very interesting player for this level because he's a very, good team fighter. He's very consistent at being able to make things happen, but he's really not that great of a laner, and that's always kind of been something that's held him back as a player so far. Has not improved too much, but he's fine, he's solid, and he had a good series here. He was definitely better than Cube. Krako was fine, even if I don't hate how Zhao Feng played a lot of this series. I think AL was just better, right? They just outplayed and outclassed their opposition, and OMG definitely didn't want to see that. I mean, you don't want to be getting outclassed by a team that's really not that much better than you. I mean, clearly they are better than you, and OMG probably doesn't deserve to be in that top 8, but, this is finally the circumstance where we can put them down for it. Dud of the series is going to go to Cube in the top lane. He's just bad. Like, he's had, the comparison that I'm going to give here for LCK fans is Rascal, where it's just like a player who was kind of interesting and pretty good for a little while, very stable on the top side, just falls off and is just not relevant anymore. Rascal gets a lot of defenders because he plays for DRX, and he's a very popular player, and he had a more aggressive playstyle than Cube did. Cube was always more of a weak side top, somebody who you could rely on, but it's very similar of, man, they've just fallen off. They're not good players anymore, and Cube has not been playing well for basically the past year and a half, and that is shown here on OMG. This has not been a good start to the year. Abel and PP God also were completely outclassed. Abel in particular getting to play his 3 famous champions, the Trist, the Aphelios, the Samira, and all of them did not look good enough. I mean, he was way too aggressive in every single game. The Aphelios in particular in game 2 was just consistently caught out by Azir shuffles or Nami bubbles, and it's just not where you want to be. The Samira, obviously, you have a much harder time of being able to play that when you have a Nami and a Karma on the other side of the map, a Rel on the other side of the map. It's kind of hard to play Samira in those instances, but he simply needed to be better this series, and he wasn't. He's had a slow start to the year. I think if you're looking for positives for OMG, Angel continues to look solid. Maybe not as good as he did for NIP when he really re-broke out, I would say, last year, but, he's been fine. He's really not been the problem, and Zhao Feng, I think, has definitely shown some interesting things in the jungle. He could have been a bit better down the stretch, but he was trying to make plays at the very least. He's an aggressive player who wants to be proactive on the map, which is a good thing, but OMG just isn't talented enough to be able to keep up with a lot of teams around them in the standings, and that is very clear. This could still be a playoff team because the bottom of the LPL is so weak right now. Basically, from number 10 to number 17, I just have no idea where anybody sits, but this is not a good loss for them. You wanted to see them at least, be able to beat teams that aren't considered playoff guarantees at the moment, and that's just not what they were able to do. But AL probably is a playoff team in their current state. That should go to show you where the LPL is at, because this team has certainly not been consistent, especially in their losses, but they look good enough at the current moment, and that's a good thing to say. We were all kind of curious whether or not this would finally be the year that AL, transcends their underperformances that they've been showing over the past couple of years, and, I think that this is going to be it. This feels like a group of 5 players that works well together. And then moving on to our 3rd series of day 1 here, the first super day, we've got a battle of 2 teams that, man, I just didn't want it to end like this. I didn't want the hype to die out like this. It's ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Rare Atom, and they do it. Rare Atom picks up their first series win of the year. They move to 1-4. They win their first game of the year, by the way, in game number 2. After game number 1, they were 0-9 in game score in terms of the regular season, at the very least, not including the fact that they made the top 4 at Demacia Cup. Just a crazy start to the year for RA in terms of momentum, but they were finally able to pick up a win here, and it wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, but it was the LPL. That's all I'm gonna say. If you know the LPL, this is a classic LPL banger. No macro, no thoughts, head empty, we're fighting, let's go. Like, this is what you look for when it comes to the LPL. This is what made the LPL kind of famous back in the day, back in 2015, 2016, 2017, are these kinds of games where it's just, let's go, man. Let's go 51 minutes and let's fight every single opportunity that we have the chance to. Really, really fun stuff. For ThunderTalk, disaster has struck. I mean, talk about teams that I really just want to show me anything at the beginning of this split to prove that they could be a top 10 team, but they just can't do it. They can't stay consistent enough. Losing to RA here is a disaster for them, but let's talk about RA first. Player of the series is going to go to Vikla. He has been pretty horrendous at the start of the split here, about as bad as anybody could have anticipated. I was very, very interested to see what Vikla was going to look like in the LPL. I thought it was a very good match of environment, and I thought this team actually had a pretty good shot to enable him well, but he was miserable at the start of the split. Week 1, he was awful. Week 2, he was really bad. Here is the Vikla I was kind of, not going to say expecting, but was hoping to see here in the LPL, was the kind where he could get enabled by his team and just take over this series. The Akali game in Game 2 was amazing. The Orianna in Game 3 was still really, really good. Just great stuff coming in from Vikla. Really happy to see him actually have a good series. Hopefully this is enough to start building some confidence on him, because I think that's really what's been lacking. And it's the other solo laner I also want to shout out, Xiaoshu in the top lane. Big fan of Xiaoshu. We talk about a lot of the top laners that are up and coming in the LPL. Xiaoshu is the one that I've essentially said that I'm planting my flag in over, players like Harry that we just talked about. I think he's kind of the future of the LPL in the top lane. He is a very fun player to watch. The Aatrox games, that's really what you're looking at here. He's become a really well-rounded player very quickly. He was kind of I'll just say a limited player in terms of what he offered early on in his career on LGD, but he has really grown into somebody that feels a lot more complete. He's somebody who feels like he's getting better every single game, and that's the kind of progression you want to see. There's a reason RA went out and got him mid-season last year to replace someone like Cube, who had been a mainstay in this organization for a long time. Really happy to see the solo laner step up. I thought Nayu was pretty good in this series. I was really high on him in the Challengers League. I really thought coming up from the LDL, I was like, this guy is going to dominate. He was a big reason why I was so high on RA. It just hasn't worked, and he wasn't a superstar in this series, but he was good enough. The macro was certainly questionable, but his team fighting is very good. Asum and Zora were there. Xiaoshu and Vikla were definitely the carries for RA, though, and it's really nice to see them be kind of the backbone for their first win of the season. But for Thunder Talk, it's disaster mode. You're 1-4. You're the same record as this RA team. Obviously, you've got a better game score, but this is not a good team, and that's really sad to say. And as much as people want to point to one player or one circumstance as to why this team isn't playing well, it's just it's a unit thing. They don't play well as a unit at the current moment. I love UCal, and this guy is phenomenal. The Ori game in Game 1 was spectacular. He was super good in that game, but man, after that, he wasn't particularly strong, and then it's not like the rest of this team is able to win games for Thunder Talk. We talk about Elo Hell a lot in other regions. You hear it a lot in the LCK in particular. X-Player is in Elo Hell, Viper is in Elo Hell somehow, or, Teddy is in Elo Hell somehow. I think UCal is the best example I can give of a player that I truly feel is in Elo Hell right now. I think you could drag and drop him onto a top 5 team in the LPL, and he would fit in very well, but here he is on a Thunder Talk team that's probably not going to make playoffs, and it's the rest of the team. It's everybody else. It's not one player. 1XN and Chocho were awful in this series, both of them. I do feel a bit bad for 1XN, and Chocho is going to get my dud of the series for this, because, man, when you're 51 minutes into the game and you're Senna, all you need to do as Nautilus is peel for that Senna. Like, you can win any fight at that point in the game, and Chocho just, refused to peel. It was very frustrating, but 1XN also was really bad in the mid game of basically every single game in this series. I just don't like how he has progressed as a player. It feels like he is significantly worse than he was last year. Again, maybe it's just surrounding core, but he has not been good so far in 2024. Beishuan has been one of the worst junglers in the LPL, and I'm the Beishuan defender. I'm the guy who has gone to bat for him when Reddit has shit-talked him and scapegoated him for years. I'm the one who's trying to sit here and say that he's not nearly as bad as people say he is, but he's been really bad to start this year. Hoya is one of the worst top laners in the LPL. It really is UCal 1v9ing every game, and if he can't do it, then they're not going to win, and it's very frustrating to say that. This is one of the worst teams in the LPL, even with a player that I consider maybe a top 10 to 15 player in the entire region. But it sucks for them. It's good for Rare Adam to be able to pick up this win. They're at last, number 17 in my power rankings going into this week, but who knows? Maybe they don't stick there. If they can build on this win, if they can keep that confidence bar rolling, this team is talented enough to be relevant. They're talented enough to even be a playoff team. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. There certainly are spots open if they go on this big 4 or 5 series win streak against maybe some bad teams. They could stay in it. Nobody's out just yet. So even though Rare Adam took, 9, 10 games to win a game in the LPL, you got to keep your head up. You got to keep your hopes high, because there still is a lot of possibility for you to grow into something that could actually matter as this spring split progresses. But now moving into day number 2, we're done with the Super Days for now until we get to day 4. But kicking off day 2, it was a much closer matchup than anticipated between JD Gaming and LGD Gaming. And JDG is going to be able to take it, but they drop game number 1 to LGD. And LGD honestly makes this series relatively interesting. I want to give them a big shout out. They are so much better than they have any right to be. And I'll just say it off the rip. If they had a competent AD carry, like if they had anybody that they could put in the bot lane, they might actually be a playoff team. Like that is genuinely the thing that is holding them back from being relevant. But this team is like actually playable. They are relatively interesting to watch and they are fun. Like they've got good pieces and maybe they're not super consistent, but they do a lot of good things. They just do not have a bot lane and it completely ruins their ability to play the game. It's very disappointing, but for JDG, you sneak your way out of here with a win. It wasn't too bad. Games 2 and 3 were relatively in your favor. You definitely played better, but losing game number 1 is definitely not, I think, what you would have wanted to see here. So let's talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Missing in the support position. Really loved what he was able to do when he was on these more aggressive engagers. Obviously, Renata is still something he can play at a high level, and Missing is known more as an enchanter player than he is as an engage player. He obviously can do both because he's a top level support, and that's just what the best supports in the world are able to do. But, you know, coming up through WE and, you know, just generally many years ago, he was known as more of an enchanter player in solo queue. And so, you know, to see him move over to some more tank-oriented supports and look better on them than he did on the enchanters, it's definitely fun to see. But it was the Rakan in game 2 where he really just was everywhere. He was able to set up Nico engages so simply and just capitalize on basically everything that the Kalista plus Xin Zhao were able to do. And then Maokai in game 3, again, very active on the map, very willing to make plays. Those ultimates are massive, and that champion is super broken, as anybody who's played solo queue in the last couple of weeks will know. Missing just looks great. He's playing really well right now. Him and Ruler continue to have the same great chemistry that they had last year, and it's really nice to see. Ruler was very stable. I think a lot of people are going to point to Yagao in this series as a big, you know, plus, and I agree the Nico was massive, but it's just hard because a lot of the engages he was able to get were very easy for him, especially in game number 3. Game 2 he was amazing, and game 3 he was still really good, probably the most important player in that game. I just don't think he himself had to do a whole ton. The champion did a lot of the heavy lifting. Still love Yagao, still think he fits into this team really well, and he's been more of a carry on this team than I expected. He has actually taken over the Knight role in terms of how he has played, and it's not necessarily been a changing of play styles. It's very much just been, okay, now we have Yagao, and we're going to get him to play like Knight did for this team, which is very fun to watch. It's a very interesting decision, but, you know, he was really good. Flandre, obviously, very good scoreline. Wasn't as impactful as maybe a scoreline would indicate, but still was very good and has been great. At the start of this split, even better than I could have anticipated. If you have a concern, it's that, you know, both junglers in this series weren't particularly good. Kanavi made up for a lot of the mistakes that he made in the back half of games, but his early games were definitely a little bit more questionable. Meteor was also definitely questionable on the other side of this matchup. We will get to that, but, you know, I want to see Kanavi get back to that, like, takeover form that he was in last year, that he was in 2022, in 2020. That's the Kanavi that I want to see. I think Yagao taking a lot of the resources has certainly made that more interesting, but it's just weird. This JDG team doesn't have the playstyle that you would expect, and it doesn't necessarily fill me with a lack of confidence, but I don't know. They're not as dominant as maybe you would anticipate. It's just something that's kind of been prevailing at the start of this season. But for LGD, this team is just simply better than anybody could have thought. The top side of this map is genuinely solid. Bertle didn't have a great series here, and, you know, he hasn't been as consistent in the last couple of weeks, but he started off very hot in the LPL. Haichao has been genuinely great in the mid lane for LGD, a player that I really did not expect to break out, but has. And honestly, the player that you're looking at is like very good for this team has been Xin Zhao in the support position. And I know I talk about this, like this happens a lot. I call him like the Umti of the LPL, where he'll have a couple of games every split where he just pops off, looks really good, and you're like, oh, he's really interesting as a player, but then like the other 75% of the games he's been really bad. That's what Umti was in the LCK. That's what Xin Zhao has kind of been in the LPL, but he's actually been really good for the most part, basically every series in the LPL so far this split. Maybe he wasn't perfect down the stretch on the Maokai and the Rakan, but that Nautilus game in game 1 was genuinely terrific. If he had an AD carry that could follow up on basically anything that he was doing, perhaps they win this series, genuinely. But Xiaoya is not good enough. He's going to get dead of the series here. His positioning is awful, and, you know, he is better than Kepler. Kepler was the single worst player in the LPL to start this split, but this position is a black hole for LGD at the current moment. They just can't find anybody to plug into this spot and actually be like a replacement level AD carry. It's been a massive disaster for them. Xiaoya is not good, and it's kind of shown in all of the series. that he has played at the beginning of this year. Kepler was certainly not better, and so I don't really know what the answer is here, but LGD has some interesting pieces. Are they a playoff team? Probably not, just because I think their problems are a little bit too big, but they're better than a lot of the teams that I have listed in the 12, 13, 14 section. I mean, we just saw Thunder Talk play. Are you telling me LGD is like definitely worse than Thunder Talk? I don't really know right now, and that's kind of a crazy thing to say, but you know, for JD Gaming, obviously you're glad to be able to get out of this with a win. You moved to 8-2 on the season. You're still undefeated. That's where you want to be. You've only played 4 series, and so we really haven't had a great look at this team, but we're definitely going to get a better look at them as this week progresses, and at least for now, they're still being able to pick up the wins, which is the most important part. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2, a battle of teams that are pretty historic rivals, but haven't quite lived up to the billing recently. Edward Gaming taking on Team WE, and WE is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. EDG has just been a disaster to start this year. Rare Atom picking up their first win does not translate over to Edward Gaming. They are going to move to 0-6, 2-12 to start the year, about as bad as you can possibly get for maybe the most historic organization in LPL history in terms of accolades. It's just been a disaster. I get it, they're in a rebuilding year. I get it, they're trying to figure out what is working and what is not, but it's hard to get a grip on basically anything that's happening on this team because there are such obvious major holes. We talked about how, oh, maybe LGD could be a playoff team if they, you know, had a better AD carry, right? If their AD carry spot was a little bit better, maybe you know, have a potential playoff team on your hands there. Well, EDG's bot lane is as bad, or their AD carry spot is as bad as LGD's, and everything else is also just way worse. And that includes Jeje in the jungle, so there's really not a lot of good to talk about here for WE. I'm glad you won. I'm still not sold on this team, and there was a very interesting substitution here that I'll talk about now. I guess Stay is in for Prince in the bot lane. Don't really know why you go out and sign Prince if you're just going to bench him after a couple of series here. I don't even think he was really that bad. I mean, maybe you can sit there and point out some of the errors, and I generally think that the reason you're making this change is because him and Awandi just didn't have great chemistry together in terms of their playstyles, but honestly, I think Prince has been significantly better than Awandi at the start of this split, and so to bench Prince over Awandi, it just feels very weird. I get it, Stay was probably the more LPL-ready player of the two that you had on deck, but I don't know why you go out and get Prince if you're just going to bench him basically immediately after not playing all that bad. It's very weird. That being said, Stay was really good in this series, and his mechanics are very clear. This is an LPL caliber AD carry, which I can't say for a lot of other teams in the LPL right now, but Stay was really solid. You know, I think there was definitely an argument to be made that he was one of the more interesting players in this series, but I'm going to give player of the series to Hang in the jungle. Finally, a good series from Hang. He has, like, I don't know if I should say quietly, but he has been one of the worst players in the LPL to start 2024. Fofo has been very good. Wayward has been very, very, very good for this team in the top lane, and, you know, Hang just has not been good enough to be able to keep up with them at the start of this year. A lot of the aggressive plays that we saw him get a little bit more comfortable making down the stretch of last year, because he is more of an aggressive player, he just wasn't making them at the beginning of this year, and when he was making them, he was making them at the wrong times. It feels like he was regressing back to the worst versions of him that we saw at the beginning of 2023, which is really not good, but this series felt a lot better. It's against EDG, and so take it with a grain of salt, but he finally was able to play a champion like Rel and actually be a creator and a facilitator in the mid game, which is all you really need him to do. That's what he does at a high level, and so it's nice to see that. Awandi was also a lot better in this series. This is by far the best series Awandi has played all split. Maybe it's because Stay is in. Honestly, that's what I would anticipate, is that he just has better chemistry with Stay, which is definitely something to keep in mind. Again, is probably why they put Stay in. I just think it's very strange. I don't think Prince deserves to get benched at all. He's clearly a top 10 to 8 AD carry in the LPL at the current moment, but it is what it is. Stay is probably better for this team, and Awandi definitely did play better here, was really good on the Rakan in Game 1. We're seeing a lot of Rakan work out in the LPL right now. Fofo was good, as he always is. Wayward was awesome, as he has been all split. He's, like, very quietly been the best top laner in the LPL so far this season. I actually don't know how quiet it has been. He is getting the praise that he deserves, but as a longtime Wayward defender, it's really nice to see him just continue to win in basically any matchup that he has put into. Again, solo kill, not the toughest of opponents, but he has beat, you know, harder top laners better, worse this year than solo kill. So good stuff from WE. You know, it's a good series. I'm not trying to be negative about it. This is one of their more complete series. It just is a very interesting roster decision, which I guess we'll wait and see whether or not this continues to pan out in the same way. But for EDG on the other side, it's just disaster. I mean, this is the worst team in the LPL, and it's really not particularly close anymore. It's every position on this team that is underperforming. Solo Kid was back in here. They can't decide whether they want to play or bench Ale. I get it. He doesn't want to practice with this team. He's like refusing to actually practice with them. And to me, that's a pretty clear sign that you just can't play him. If he doesn't want to be here, then don't play him. Like, you're not winning anyways, even with Ale on this team. So to me, I just don't play him. But solo kill is a disaster in the top lane. He's not the worst player of all time, but he's never going to win you games in the same way that Ale would. Jeja has been horrendous. He feels completely mentally checked out. Like, you can say that obviously having a bunch of losing lanes is going to contribute to a jungler playing bad, but his map rotations are really slow. Like, he is just not in it right now. It's clear that his mental is just not there. The Snake has been horrendous. He's going to get dud of the series here. He was dud of the week in week number 3 before we went on Lunar New Year break. He continues to look awful. I get it. You don't want to play Leave and Jeja, especially if things aren't going well, but the Snake is certainly not the answer in the bot lane. Vampire is, a contender for one of the worst players in the LPL. Like, certainly the worst support, but is contender for one of the worst players regardless of position in the LPL. And Fisher, he's been better recently. He's been better in lane, which is good, but it's not like he's been good. He's just been not the worst mid laner like he was for the first 2 weeks of the season. And so I don't really know what else to say about EDG at this point. This team is a disaster. They are bad at the game of League of Legends, and I don't really think they're going to have a shot to win a lot of games as the season goes on. This is almost certainly going to be one of the bottom 2 to 3 teams at absolute best for them throughout the rest of this split, and that's just kind of what you get when a team falls apart in the way that they did this offseason. But for WE, this team is fine. Again, they're number 7 in the power rankings purely because there's just not a lot of great teams. I don't feel they're very complete. Maybe they become complete if, Awandi can start actually playing well. Hang has been a disaster at the start of this split, but this was a really good series to potentially get his confidence back. If you can get those 2 positions, jungle and support, which have been the weak links for WE to step up throughout the rest of the year, the solo lanes have been good enough to be able to carry this team to a relatively decent standing. This might actually be a better team now than they were going into the Lunar New Year break, and that's a really good thing to say about a team that, whether they're good or not, is probably going to make the playoffs. And then moving on to day number 3 here in week number 4 of the LPL, and a 2-3 battle that did not go as planned. It was FunPlus Phoenix taking on LNG Esports, and FunPlus Phoenix picks up a massive win here. They really seem like the weird team of the split. It feels like every single region has one weird team that just beats good teams and loses to bad teams. That's kind of what FPX has been so far this year, a team that has been wildly inconsistent, but on their best days actually looks like a very good playoff caliber team. And, obviously they haven't been able to do that consistently at all, but this was a great series for them, being able to take down LNG, who, yes, has not looked great at the start of this split, but has had a really tough schedule, is making a couple of changes at some key positions. It's a really big win for FPX. This is generally a massive win for them. For LNG, it's starting to get a little bit dire for you. The changes you made this offseason have made your team significantly worse, and, I'm not going to say I told you so on that because, people don't like hearing I told you so, but, Weiwei was not an upgrade over Tarzan. Mark is a side grade to Hong, and playstyle-wise, I think this takes away a lot of the comfort that this team had last year. It really felt like these players got the most out of each other in terms of playstyle. Like Tarzan and Scout had phenomenal mid-jungle synergy, even if they weren't always making the perfect play. It felt like Gala was enabled very well by Hong, and he's just not in the lineup anymore. It just feels like so much is going wrong for LNG, but obviously that's to the benefit of a team like FunPlus Phoenix in this series, who was fantastic, and there's no way to talk about this series without first talking about Milky Way in the jungle. He's going to get player of the series. Both of the Kindred games in the back half here were phenomenal. Carry performances from him on Kindred. We know a lot of LPL junglers really like these, not to say carry-oriented marksmen in the jungle, but Graves and Kindred are certainly not strangers to a lot of LPL junglers. Milky Way just kind of following that tradition, but he out-jungled Weiwei for a majority of this series. Even if game 1 was a little bit shakier on the Lee Sin, both of the Kindred games were so massive that he single-handedly won this series for his team, and that's big. We were talking about a lot of the rookie junglers coming into the LPL this split, this year, and there were a lot of them, more than I was expecting, and it's not the ones that I was expecting to pop off. Milky Way was someone I was very high on. He was a player that I praised a lot in my primer video. I was very much looking for him to start over Moyan, and that obviously has turned out correct, but I did not expect him to be better than players like Nayu coming up from the LDL, and so to see him really succeed at this level very quickly is very promising. He has been the best player on this team so far this split, and that is a really, really big positive. It's not like the rest of this team has been bad. Life has actually been very good over the past couple of weeks. He had a slow start to the split. Weeks 1, week 2, not great, but weeks 3 and 4 have actually been really big before Life, and it seems to be like he's getting back on the right track. It was a really rough 2023, a really down year. It feels like the confidence is starting to come back. Him and Dectum have very good chemistry down in the bot lane, especially when they play, Swain Center or whatever the hell they're playing in game number 3. I think Life has very quietly been very good over the past couple of weeks. I hope he's able to keep that up rather than kind of revert back to what he was last year, obviously, for Hanwha, and what he was in the first couple of weeks. But Care is the only real concern with this team now. He is somebody who I've really liked in the past, but he's honestly been kind of bad to start 2024. He's been kind of the weak link of this team, if you will, in my opinion, the weakest player on FPX so far in 2024, and with such a good mid lane, crew, I guess, in the LPL, so many good mid laners that you have to face game after game after game. You can't really afford to be like a bottom 5-ish mid laner like Care has kind of been at the start of this split. So certainly something to keep in mind, but Milky Way has been awesome. Life has been playing better as of late, and Dectum's very stable as an AD carry. That's a recipe for success. FPX is in a position where they could potentially be a playoff team. Again, I'm reiterating this for a lot of teams because it's important to remember that playoffs are wide open for these teams right now. So just something to consider. But for LNG on the other side, again, things are just really going wrong. 2-4 is certainly not the place you want to be, even with a really tough schedule to start the year. This loss to FPX just shouldn't have happened. Dud of the series is going to go to Scout in the mid lane. He is the player that it feels like is the most affected by a lot of the changes they made in the offseason. Him and Weiwei are not on the same page, even when things are going right like they did in game 1, where the Xin Zhao is constantly making plays where Karma is enabling him. The moment you take Scout off of something that is there to enable jungle, all of a sudden this team doesn't really know how to operate in that same vein. The Viego Azir in game 3 was disastrous. Scout played really bad in game number 2 on the Trist as well. It's just crazy to see a player who was the back-to-back MVP in the LPL last year start so slow this year. He's been genuinely bad for LNG, one of the weakest parts of this team, but again, I chalk a lot of that up to the fact that it's just not good synergy between him and Weiwei in the jungle, and so really don't like that. Weiwei, like I said, played well in game 1, but games 2 and 3 were really bad for him. He probably would have gotten done to the series if he wasn't so good in game number 1. He has very loudly been bad for LNG over the course of this split. Mark doesn't seem like he's fitting in, although him and Gala certainly have been far from the problem. Zika was really bad in game 2, but recovered some of that in game number 3. Something's just not working for this LNG team. I'm pointing to jungle mid. I think to me that's the very obvious, place where things are just kind of going wrong for LNG at the current moment. I think Weiwei has been, I hate to toot my own horn, but he's been exactly what I thought he was going to be for this team, which is way too aggressive, somebody who doesn't fit in and honestly isn't that big of a mechanical upgrade from Tarzan in the first place, and it's really hurting this team. Shout out to all the LNG fans who scapegoated Tarzan all of last year, who were screaming at him outside of the venue when he would leave. Look at what this team looks like without his stability in the jungle. I'm not saying it was all him, but playstyles matter. You're not always going to look like a star, even if you're really positive for the team, and I think LNG is unfortunately kind of learning that the hard way right now, but nice win for FPX. Again, they're very much in the playoff race. They're very much in the top 10 race, especially with so many teams like OMG and like Thunder Talk really underperforming at the beginning of this week. This is a really big win. Hopefully they're going to be able to keep up this momentum. If Milky Way is legit, if he's the real deal, and if he's going to be a top half jungler, this absolutely could be a playoff team in the spring split, and that's pretty fun to say. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3. If you thought the first series was a bit of an upset, man, do I have a series for you here. It's Invictus Gaming taking on Bilibili Gaming. And IG takes it not 2-1, but 2-0. A clean sweep coming in from IG over a Bilibili team that has looked unstoppable at the start of this year. What happened here? I mean, how can you even describe what this series was? This was domination from Invictus. They played ridiculously well, and we're talking about these teams near the bottom of like my playoff power rankings around 8 or 9 or 10, not stepping up and not being consistent. Well, at this point, how much longer can we deny that Invictus Gaming is very clearly a playoff team in the LPL right now, that they are above the teams that are around them in the standings? It is very, very impressive to see them do this, and especially because the player that popped off is new to the team. He had just joined. Leon is back here in the jungle. I am very, very excited to see him play again. I've never been the biggest Leon fan, but he is really fun to watch. A very aggressive player, gonna have some great games, gonna have some bad games. I think I compared a different player to Umti. I think it was Jin Zhao earlier in this video. Leon really is Umti. Like, they're the same players. They are very fun to watch, players that are really good when they get early leads, maybe not as consistent consistent as you would like, but when they are able to snowball the game out of control, it gets very difficult to end up stopping that snowball, basically whoever you are on the other side of this matchup, and BLG learned that the hard way. He plays Brand, he plays Graves, and he's able to dominate. Crazy good stuff from Invictus Gaming. I think this is a massive pickup, not only because I think Leon's a decent jungler, you know, I think he's a good addition, but also because Tianjin, to me, was like the only remaining weak link of this team. He just wasn't very consistent. He was going to be okay on a game-to-game basis. He certainly was playing better in 2024 than he did last year in 2023, where he was just actively losing games for his team. But, you know, to bring in somebody who can be a bit more stable, like Leon, crazy to say that about Leon, but, you know, to somebody who can be that carry, but still offer you a bit more of the game-to-game consistency, that's huge for Invictus, and it really showed here. So, really good stuff from him. I thought Wink was also phenomenal in this series. We can talk about Elk and On like being really solid. They really haven't been game breakers at the start of this split. It's been Knight and Shun really in the jungle mid duo that have been taking over games for Bilibili. On has been great. I don't want to say that. Elk has just been a little bit less dominant, I would say, is less of a focal point for Bilibili. Wink made it clear that, like, no, we're here to play. I really like Wink. I have gone from being like, why is this guy starting at the support position? He's the worst support in the league at the beginning of 2023, to like, oh my god, this is a top 5 support in the LPL. Like, he is dominating at the current moment. He's been so good over the past year and a half. On obviously plays off of him really well, but I think Wink is the star in this bot lane. That's really becoming clear. Cryan continues to just win. He has been awesome at the start of this split. You Should Know Me has developed really well. He was winning lane against Bin. That's not easy. Like, Invictus just won across the board. They were the better team in this series, and, you know, you got to give them a lot of credit. I'm not going to freak out for Bilibili on the other side of this, though, because again, it's hard to go undefeated in the LPL. It's hard to sit here and say that, oh, you're not going to screw up at least once. Coming back from Lunar New Year, you know, coming back from a pretty big break, maybe not having your head entirely in the game. I get it. Same thing happened to Gen G over in the LCK, but Bilibili definitely needed to play better here. They got destroyed. Like, both of these games were not close. I can't make that clear enough. Done of the series could basically go to anybody. Nobody played well here. I'm going to give it to June because it really did feel like Leon was just completely out jungling him in every aspect of the game, was dominating early by generating a lot of pressure, was dominating late in terms of the team fights, was closing out games quickly, and June was really not able to do anything in this series. It was crazy to watch, but you could realistically give this to Knight in the mid lane, who again was also useless, played Ori, played Karma. You know, he kind of filled the Yagao role in this series and ended up just losing because of it, because they didn't have any pressure. Elk was horrendous in this series. The scoreline doesn't necessarily say it, but his positioning was really bad. It just wasn't, it's not the Elk that we all kind of know. Bin got destroyed by You Should Know Me. On was completely outclassed by Wink on the other side of this matchup. It's hard to glean a lot from this series, if I'm being honest, because it is so out of character for Bilibili. If this becomes a trend, that's when I'm going to start to get concerned, but one series against a really hot Invictus Gaming team, a new jungler, as we've seen basically in every region. When you bring a new player in, that kind of brings a spark, a little bit of a spice to the team that plays. I think when you add like a new jungler especially, it's like a 85% win rate in the last couple of years in major regions. Somebody had the stat on Twitter. I'll link it if I can remember it, but you know, I'm not freaking out about this Bilibili loss is essentially what I'm saying. You're not expecting yourself to go undefeated. I guess I just wish this series was a little bit closer, that you showed a little bit more fight and fire. You kind of got destroyed, but, you know, hopefully you can bounce back. It's definitely not going to be an easy back half of the week for you, but if you can pick that up, you know, pick up some wins later this week, that's going to be big. And then for Invictus, again, great win. How can you say anything else? This is massive. This team is probably legit right now. Hopefully Leon can keep this up. We've seen him start hot in certain splits and not be able to keep that momentum and pace up for the rest of the split. Hopefully that doesn't happen here with Invictus, because I think that this team is really, really, really fun to watch in their current iteration. But if they are legit, who's to say this can't be like a top 5 or 6 team? This has 2023 OMG narrative written all over it. Very different teams in terms of playstyle, but in terms of narrative, it has that vibe all over it. A young team, a core that's been together for a little while, being able to rise above their talent level to compete for, you know, upper echelon spots in the LPL, and that would be really fun to see from an organization that hasn't exactly been there in quite a while. Moving on to day number 4 now, and we got a really good series to kick off day number 4. Pretty fun one to watch between Ultra Prime and Weibo Gaming. Not exactly the most contentious of series, but a really good showing from Weibo, which I think is what a lot of fans were looking for in this. Obviously, Ultra Prime kind of playing above their weight for the most part in this split. A lot of people considered them the weakest team on paper in the league, me included, and they've really been relatively competitive. That continued here. There were good moments coming in from their carry duo, specifically again from Uakai, who just continues to to look very good on this team, but Weibo is simply better, and by a lot. Everybody on the team played really well in this series, and honestly, I'm starting to get a good idea of what this Weibo team is. I don't think they're going to be what they were last year, which is this surprise team that makes a lot of upsets happen in the playoffs and ends up getting to Worlds, overachieves at Worlds, etc., etc. I don't think they have that in them this year, but this is still a pretty solid team, and a lot of that is off the back of this bot lane just continuing to be very good. Player of the series for me is going to go to Light. Really good series from him. Pretty, typical Light series, if we're being honest. Like, this is just kind of who he is as a player. Can be really, really impactful on a game where he's just better than the opposition. Isn't exactly the most aggressive or game takeover-y AD carry in the entire world. He's not Elk. He's not, a player of that caliber who's going to flip games on 60-40 plays and, really try to make his own advantages. He's going to take what the other team gives him or what his teammates are able to set up for him. And he's going to do that just about as well as anybody else in the entire world. And that's what he was able to do here. A lot of credit should go to Xiao Hao in the jungle. Really good series from him. The Xin Zhao and the Viego were both very good, and honestly, he played this just about as well as you could have. I know the scoreline looks maybe a little bit, not as good as maybe someone like Light who went 18-0-13, but I thought Xiao Hao was phenomenal. I think this was his best series as a member of Weibo Gaming, and we've really been waiting for the breakout. I loved Xiao Hao. He was very much a high-tier channel darling for a long time on Anyone's Legend on this channel. And, I was really thinking that he was going to be a massive upgrade over Weiwei. Now, Weiwei is very much struggling over on LNG, and Xiao Hao is probably playing better than him this split, but I don't know if Xiao Hao's had a better impact towards this team than Weiwei did last year. I do know that he was better in this series, that this series is kind of what you brought Xiao Hao in to do, which is carry games. I mean, truly be a difference maker in that jungle role, and I think that he was in this series. Again, going into Ultra Prime, not the toughest of opponents, but still nice to see. Crisp was really good here. Crisp has been very good to start this split. Who is surprised? Maybe Reddit is surprised. I don't know, but he was amazing last year, was the best player on Weibo before they got to Worlds last year, and was the reason they got to Worlds in the first place. It's really not surprising to see him continue to be very good in the regular season here for this team. ZDZ's been really stable, really has not been a focal point for this team, but it's not messed up all that much, which is all you can really ask. And Xiao Hu, not a carry, and certainly not somebody who is at the peak of his powers as he has been in previous years, but it's still very good. Certainly not a bad mid laner, just not the dominant Xiao Hu that we knew from back in like 2018, 2019, but still, Weibo Gaming is really solid. Again, I don't know if this is a Worlds team. I don't think the top of the LPL is impenetrable by any means. Ninjas in Pyjamas is my number 4. I don't think they're guaranteed to be a top 4 team for the entirety of the year. I do think that Weibo, is kind of in that zone. I just need to see more consistency out of this team. There's really not a superstar at the moment in terms of, what they have on their roster. Crisp is close to that, and Xiao Hao and Light both have the potential to be that for this team if they can get there more consistently, but right now this just kind of feels like a good team, maybe not a great team. And then for Ultra Prime on the other side, they're just not a great team. They're not a good team, right? That's the problem with them. They're falling into, traps that good teams just don't fall into. I still think they have a lot of positives. Yuakai continues to look very good on this team. A very interesting mid lane prospect. I really like that he's getting a lot of spotlight on this Ultra Prime team. I see a lot of people saying that he should, it sucks that he's on Ultra Prime and he would be better on a better team, and I agree with that. He's better than the players around him, but I really don't think there's a lot of spots for mid laners in the LPL, and I certainly don't think there are a lot of teams that are going to play through him in the way that this team ends up playing through him, and so I don't think it's the worst spot in the world to potentially just lose for a year and then potentially get a better shot going into next year, but it's the rest of the team that is a bit of a problem at the current moment. Hacker was really good earlier in this series, and he's been okay, I would say, for Ultra Prime, but he was awful in this series. He's going to get dud of the series for me overall. Really bad Sedge and Xin Zhao game. He's really getting this for game 2, where he was not good. His engages were really bad. His tempo was really bad. Just wasn't really able to keep up with Weibo and Xiao Hao really at all. I think that Hacker's okay. Again, this doesn't change my opinion. He's going to have bad series, especially when he goes against good junglers, but, he's not always going to have bad series. This is just who Hacker is. Decade is nothing on the top side. I mean, he offers nothing. He doesn't win lane. He's not a good team fighter. I don't really know why he's in the LPL, to be honest, especially after the showing he gave on LGD last year. Jue, I think, has really started to fall off a bit. He was actually pretty okay at the start of this split, and obviously I loved what he was doing for BLG Juniors in the LDL. I thought he was one of the more exciting support prospects coming into the league this year, but it feels like this team's losing ways have started to get to him. He has played really bad in the last 2 weeks. Hopefully that is just temporary, but Doggo was fine. Really wasn't great. His scoreline's definitely better than how he played. Yuakai was the star for Ultra Prime in this series, and that just ends up being kind of the synopsis of their season up until this point. It's Yuakai carrying games for them and the rest of the team just not being good enough to be able to win them, but They're not the worst team in the league. They're better than the teams that just can't pick up any wins. That is very, very clear. They're just never going to be competitive enough to ever reach for like a playoff spot. At least I wouldn't expect that. And then for Weibo, this seems solid. Obviously, they're a playoff team, but top 4's got to be the goal for an org that just went to World Finals. And I just don't know if you're there just yet. This was a really solid series, and I know it sounds like I'm being a bit doomer on a team that just won very handily, but I just don't know if I feel confident that they're going to be as good as everybody wants them to be at the current moment. I do like what I see in this series, and if Xiaohao and Light can play as consistently as they did here, they're going to have a much better chance. We're just going to have to wait and see on them, though. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4. Pretty interesting one, a pretty classic, I guess, matchup here in the LPL that wasn't quite as interesting this time around. RNG taking on Top Esports, and Top Esports picks up a very easy win here. There is so much going wrong with RNG. This doesn't even really feel like a playoff team at the current moment. They got destroyed last week. I brought them down to number 10 in my power rankings, if only because there's just nobody else that I really wanted to put into the top 10 above them, but this is not a playoff team. I mean, this team is in dire straits. They are significantly worse than all of the teams around them in the standings at the current moment. Like this, they're playing like a bottom 5 team in the LPL. That's just kind of the case with RNG right now. Obviously, all the props in the world to Top Esports. This team is clicking in a way that I think we all were just really hoping they would. You never really know with TES. They sometimes overperform, but most of the time they underperform the talent that is on this roster, and so it's nice to see them get a group together that looks really good on paper, and it's actually all coming together basically in the exact way that you could have wanted it to. So really good stuff from them. We'll talk about RNG in a second, but we'll start with TES. This is just a dominant series. This has become kind of regular for them at this point. Player of the series is easily going to go to 369 in the top lane. Oh my god. Oh my goodness, man. This guy is like here to play. I get it. He was really good last year and he was playing weak side, so you can't really judge, his ability to take over games in the same way. And he was obviously phenomenal on JDG in 2022 when he was given more resources, when he was a bit stronger side. But unleashing 369 again here on Top Esports is such a refreshing thing to see, because he's just obliterating people. Breathe has been the only good player on RNG this year, and again, there might be some comments about Wei. My thoughts. We'll get to that in a second. Breathe has been the only good player on RNG this year, and 369 obliterated him in this laning phase. Like, this was not close in either game. The Aatrox looked unstoppable, was able to translate a gigantic lane lead into taking over team fights harder than basically anybody this week at all in any of the games that we've covered so far. It's just ridiculously impressive. 369 making a case to be in the MVP conversation. It's still very early in this split, but he has been phenomenal at the start here. Probably the best top laner, maybe him and Wayward, right? Those are the two best top laners in the LPL in terms of performances. Flandre's up there as well, but man, he has been good. I think Cream also looked very good in this series. It's really nice to see that, for somebody who can't play Azir, he sure plays Azir pretty well, huh? Obviously, we all laugh and joke on this channel about the Cream small champion pool, or basically any, like, Zeka small champion pool. It's all, like, bullshit, and we all kind of know that, and Cream proves that again here. I know it's against Tong Yuan, and I know Tong Yuan is not very good at League of Legends, and he really has not grown at all since he was brought into the LPL, but it's still nice to see Cream be really aggressive, actually win some mid-game skirmishes, I should say, and translate that into being able to carry games. Like, his damage was off the charts in this series. Tian has been amazing for Top Esports this split. He struggled a bit out the gate. Week 1 wasn't great for him, and that loss against Bilibili wasn't perfect for him, but outside of that, he has been phenomenal for this team, and Jackie Love and Mako are the best 2v2 bot lane in the LPL at the current moment. I wouldn't say the best bot lane, but certainly up there, right? It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility to say that. This team is just working. 369 looks amazing, and everybody else in this team is certainly playing well enough for them to be a contender to win the LPL. That's the sphere that TES is in at the moment. But for RNG on the other side of this matchup, they're just bad. This is just a bad League of Legends team at the current moment. I usually preface a lot of these conversations, or the conversation I'm about to have, with, oh, I don't want to sound braggadocious, oh, I don't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn. But screw it, in this case, in this particular instance, I do want to toot my own horn. I do want to sound a bit braggadocious, because LWX has been benched here for RNG. He was miserable to start this year. Him and Ming have negative chemistry, and obviously Ming has not been playing well. I'm not going to say it was entirely LWX, but I got so much hate in the offseason in the comments. That was basically the only thing that was in my comment section for a lot of my videos was, you're underestimating LWX. This guy was hard mega stuck on FPX. He was in ELO hell. People love that term, ELO hell. He's going to go to RNG, and this team's going to be top 5, and they're going to crush. And I put him like number 13 in terms of my ADC rankings. I said that he was probably at best going to be, a mid-tier AD carry, somebody who could survive on this team and allow the good players to actually go and be proactive. But you know, he was not good. He was not good last year. He's not been good for a year and a half. And, you know, I think people are really starting to catch up to that. I hope this does prove to you guys that I do watch the games. I don't know if that was ever in question, but I get a bunch of comments that's like, clearly you don't watch the games on my opinion videos. So here, I do watch the games. LWX was not good for a little while, and he was replaced by LP in this series. Now, credit to LP, you know, he comes in, probably not a lot of practice time, has to play with Ming, who's very out of form and continuously is trying to play Ashe, and it's just not working, and he gets clobbered. He has absolutely no chance to survive here. Mako makes his life a living hell throughout the entirety of this series. He is going to get dead in the series because he is the one who made a lot of the negative plays, but I want to give him some time. I want to see what he can do if he could potentially get more opportunities here. I've never been a big fan of LP. Thought he was very overrated on LNG. I thought he was just kind of whatever on RNG last year. He's not a top half 80 carry in this league. He's a bottom half 80 carry for sure, but I don't think this series is going to be indicative of what he's going to play like for the rest of the year. I guess we'll have to see that, but Ming continues to really struggle. This guy is just not playing well. I don't know what he's doing, but he's got to stop playing Ashe. Like, I get it, you know, it's really strong right now, but it is very clear that Ming is not the kind of player who can play marksman support. He's just not good at it. He cannot play Ashe to save his life, and that game one was miserable. Maokai also didn't look great. Get him on something that he knows. Get him on Nautilus, get him on Leona. I don't care if it's not meta, just figure it out, right? Like, get him on something he can play, because it is horrible to watch. Breathe got obliterated in the top lane. Like I said, he's been this team's best player this year, but this series was not indicative of that. Tong Yuan and Wei have no chemistry, and Wei has really fallen off in terms of actually being able to generate any pressure. I know, I get it. It's hard when your lanes are losing, but his pathing is really bad. Like, it's not just the fact that lanes are losing. He's getting out-tempoed by junglers even in good situations, and so, you know, it's just not been a good year for RNG. This is a bad team. 2-4 honestly probably oversells how good this team is at the moment. They feel like a bottom 5, bottom-ish team, right? And that's not good. Like, RNG had top 5 expectations, and right now they're just underperforming them at every level. But for top esports, this is a top 3 team. You know, losing to Bilibili isn't the worst loss in the world. I'm excited to see if this team can continue to grow. Cream really is kind of the X factor for whether or not this team can be good enough to compete at the top level, because everything else is working, and he was really good in this series. I believe in 369 and Tion and Jackie Love and Mako to be able to make a title push, but it really does feel like this team is starting to become more complete game after game, and that's a very scary thought for the rest of the LPL. But now moving on to day number 5 here in week 4 of the LPL, and we kicked off day 5 with a matchup between ThunderTalk Gaming and Anyone's Legend, where AL is going to pick up another victory, this time in a 2-0 win over ThunderTalk. AL looks really good right now. They're actually playing some really good League of Legends. I feel like they are starting to find a game plan, a synergistic way to incorporate everybody into the game, and I think everybody has really stepped up individually in terms of their performances, and it's really allowed this team to kind of start playing a lot more aggro, and I think that generally that's just what you want to see from teams that control their own destiny. They're 5-2. I know their game score isn't quite as good as that. 10-7 is solid, but 5-2 is a really good series score. Their schedule is going to get a bit harder, but at least for now, they honestly look like a pretty surefire playoff team, and especially in the LPL right now, where a lot of those slots are pretty open. That's good to see from a team like AL, but for ThunderTalk on the other side here, they're just not good, and I know some people are going to point to 1 or 2 players on this team and say they're the problem, and yes, trust me, there are a couple players on this team that are playing really bad. I will acknowledge that. I'm not going to sit here and try and pretend like Beishuan isn't one of the worst players in the LPL right now, but this is far from a one-player issue, and I don't want the conversation to kind of move in that direction just because Beishuan has been really bad. It's not just, oh, replace jungle, and this team all of a sudden gets better. I really would highly doubt that that ends up being the case. I think this is genuinely just a team that is not playing well at the current moment. A lot of their players need to start changing things up, and they need a different game plan. I think that's become abundantly clear, but let's talk about AL first and foremost. That's what we do. We talk about winners first. Player of the series for me, once again, going to go to Shanks in the mid lane. This one was another very good performance by Shanks, and he's actually had a really, really good, like, second half of the first half start. I don't know how to say that. Second quarter, whatever you want to say. He's been really good over the past 2 weeks. He's been good in week number 3, and he was really good this week as well, obviously. We've kind of been waiting for Shanks to lock in. I wouldn't say that he was bad in the first couple of weeks. He just wasn't taking over. He wasn't really playing all that well in lane in the first couple of series he played here for AL, but it seems like those problems have kind of fixed themselves over the past couple of weeks, and it's really nice to see that. He was awesome on the Azir in game number 1 in particular here, but the Karma was obviously still very relevant. I think you could give player of the series to a couple of people here on AL. I think very realistically, basically anybody on the top side of the map could have gotten it. Krako was amazing in this series on the Xin Zhao. I think Krako generally has been very good for AL, especially kind of playing with Kale. I really think getting these two back together has helped both of them immensely. Like, Kale's obviously very good in lane in the isolated 2v2. We talked about that earlier on in the week, but he's also very good at being able to help out his jungler, and it was Krako and Kale as a duo that really started to take over the LCK a couple of years ago, almost got that Live Sandbox team to Worlds alongside Prince, and so nice to see them get back together and for Krako to continue to look as good as he does, and Harry was awesome in this series, easily the best he has played on AL up until this point. This was really the first time where he was able to dominate lane and transition that into general pressure across the entire map. That Udyr game in Game 1, he was unkillable, and I get that sometimes happens on that champion, but what we've been seeing with Udyr is it kind of does separate the really good top laners at transitioning versus the top laners that are just good at being able to generate leads, right? Harry finally started to show that he can be a bit more of a complete player here, and I think that is definitely something to be excited about. Hope was good, like I said, Kale was good, but it was really the top side of the map, Shanks, Krako, and Harry that I think played really well for AL in this one. And then for ThunderTalk on the other side, you know, it's very easy to point at Beishwan and Hoya and say they single-handedly lost this series, and trust me, they were awful. Beishwan's going to get done of the series. I'm not going to deny that he has been maybe the most harmful player towards his individual team of anybody in the LPL, and Hoya's certainly not better. Like, he has been a bottom 1 top laner for essentially a year now, going back to summer split of 2023, and then now here in 2024, he has been awful. It just feels like whatever re-emergence he had at the beginning of his tenure here on ThunderTalk, all of that magic has gone in the past couple of months, and that's really sad to say, but I want to make it abundantly clear that I don't believe that ThunderTalk's problems are just Beishwan and Hoya. I think 1xN and Chocho are not clicking. 1xN has really not played well at all this split. You don't hear about him a lot, but that's because he's picking Ezreal and Lucian and doing nothing on them. Just getting outscaled, not playing aggressive. It's really not good. Chocho was really bad this week, both on Engagers and on Enchanters. I get he's more of an Engage player, and that's why maybe he doesn't look as good on Ashe or Milio or things like that, but it's not like he was better on Nautilus earlier this week. He's just not been good, and this was the first series where I was like, oh, Yukao just got outplayed. He lost both laning phases, really did not have his head in the game, and as much as I've been saying that he is elo held, like, he's going to have to play better if he wants to be the carry of this team, if he wants to be the best player on this team. We know there's been some behind-the-scenes ThunderTalk drama in previous years, last year especially. I'm not going to say that that's happening here, but it's clear that there is something going wrong in terms of what ThunderTalk is performing. Like, Beishwan has lost all of the good traits that made him a jungler that I was really interested in for a long time, which included very good pathing and generally just stable macro throughout the entirety of the game. And Hoya has just become unplayable. Like, he is not a playable top laner in the current state. There are a lot of players in the LPL that are struggling. Hoya is near the top of that list, and Beishwan might be at the top of that list right now. It's really, really bad. 1xN and Chocho need to be better. Yukao's been good, but there's only so much he can do, and even so, he wasn't good in this series, and so what really are you expecting from ThunderTalk? I don't know. This is one of the worst teams in the LPL at the current moment. 1 in 5 does sum up how good this team is. I've been saying that they've been better than their record all, split long up until this point, but they're not. They really have not been able to get to that point, and it's frustrating, but this team is not good, and changes need to be made. And then for AL on the other side, this is a good team. 5-2, maybe doesn't, show how good they actually are. This is somewhere between like the 8th to probably 10th or 11th best team in the league, and that's a really nice place for them to sit. I think they would have been really excited about that at the beginning of the year. Shanks seems to be getting into really good form at the moment. If that continues, that's massive for AL. That's a game changer for them. Krako's been great. Kale's been great. Harry seems to be playing better. He was better in this series, and Hope is a nice, stable bot laner for this team. They have a very good composition of players. It's all just about whether or not they can keep it up once their schedule does get inevitably tougher. Then moving on to our second series of day number 5 here, a battle of two teams that are really kind of struggling to find their footing, I guess, at the start of this split. Rare Atom taking on OMG. And OMG does pick up a very necessary win here. If they had lost this, I would have really started to get concerned about them. RA is not a good team. They have not been a good team at any point this year. Even with their win earlier this week to get out of the winless column, they are not particularly strong. They're just not the worst team in the entire world. OMG should be able to beat a team like that, even with all of the problems that are going on with this team right now. The fact that Abel and PP God have regressed massively after having a weakened topside. The fact that their top laner might be the worst in the entire league. Well, I say that, but there are a couple that definitely have underperformed him a bit. There are still positives, and I talked about jungle mid being that for OMG. That continued to be the strength for them in this series. Not to say Abel, PP God, and Cube didn't all play better than they have at any point in this split up until this point. I honestly believe this might be the best series OMG has played in terms of a complete game, and I think that that's generally fair to say, but They still rely a ton on their jungle and mid duo to be able to win early and to be able to push the tempo and really control the pace of the game, and that's exactly what they did. Player of the series for me is going to go to Zhao Feng in the jungle, 2 games of Viego, and they both looked incredibly good. Really digging Zhao Feng. I had no idea what to expect from him. He was basically a backup the entire time he was in the LDL, didn't really have any sort of tape to go off of, so I put him as my last ranked jungler going into the year. He has been anything but. He has been an upper half jungler in the LPL basically from day one, and that's just a hard thing to do. There have been so many junglers, including the person that used to be ahead of him in his own LDL team, Nayu, on the other side of this, that, you know, had a lot more hype and had a lot more expectation and just have not been able to live up to that in terms of consistency. But Zhao Feng has actually been really good for OMG, and that's a really big boon because Angel is still really good in the mid lane. I know people continuously underestimate him. They underestimated him last year. People talked about how, you know, insert X like photic meme about how he was the one who carried NIP last year. It was crazy. Angel was amazing. Him and Shadow had very good chemistry. It feels like he has slotted almost exactly into the same role here with OMG and with Zhao Feng. I think it's a little bit different because Angel was such a big resource carry last year for NIP in the summer split. He was bad for RNG in the spring split. Do not worry, I do not forget that. But, you know, he was such a resource carry in the summer split that to see him go back to that more resource-less style that he was very famous for on Suiting for so many years with Zhao Feng, a rookie jungler here, and just making it work, it's very impressive stuff. Like I said, Cube, Abel, and PB God were also very good, but to me, this series was about the jungle mid-gap, and that applies to RA as well. We were hyping them up so much. We were so excited to finally see Vikla have a good series at the beginning of this week. All of that to come crumbling back down here in series number 2. He's going to get done of the series yet again. It's confidence, man. That's really the only thing I can say is he continuously is trying to over-make plays. Obviously, we know mechanically speaking, he's good enough to be able to survive in this league. And hell, we've seen him be able to go up against other good mid laners and actually do well, you know, individually. We saw it with UCal earlier this week. We know Vikla can win. It's just, man, when he goes for 50-50s, he almost always loses them. It is crazy how consistent that ends up happening. He needs to get himself at least a little bit more in check in terms of the decision making because it's just too aggro in its current state. He needs to be a little bit better about that. Angel is too good of a player to be making the plays and the decisions that he made. Do I think he's the worst player in the LPL? No, I don't think he's the worst player in the LPL. Do I think he's close right now? Yeah, like I think, you know, Beishuan, Vampire, I mean, everybody on EDG, right? Like they're all going to be in that conversation. Hoya on Thunder Talk, like he's absolutely in that conversation, but Vikla very much has earned that spot as well in terms of just not really getting that he has to change his style coming over here to the LPL, but Nayu continues to underperform immensely. I was so high on this guy coming up from the LDL, and it's just not worked out. Zhao Feng destroyed him in this series, and you know, maybe it's because he knew him, maybe it's because he's scrimmed against him a ton, but man, Nayu was awful here. Xiaoshu got outplayed by Cube. That's never a good sign, even though he was relatively okay. In team fights, Asum and Zora are just not good. They've never been a good bot. Neither of these two have ever really been all that consistent at this level. I know people still have a lot of hope for Asum, but I've always been lower on him as a player. RA's just a bad team. They're in that zone with EDG and with Thunder Talk and with Ultra Prime. Like, they're in the bottom section of teams in the LPL at the current moment, and that has become very, very clear. But for OMG, again, nice win. Again, it doesn't change everything that I think about this team. I'm still not super enthused about how they played to start this split, but at the very least, they have 2 players that are playing well. If Cube, Abel, and PP God, specifically Abel and PP God, can just get a bit more consistent down in the bot lane, anything close to what they were last year, this absolutely should be a playoff team. They're really not that far out of being, like, locked into that spot anyways. I don't know where I'm going to land at the end of week number 4, but this is at least a very good win to pick up. And then moving on to our third series of day number 5, and it's another one that top versus bottom team, not really a big upset. Edward Gaming taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and NIP picks up another win. They moved to 6-1 to start the year. It's 2-0, so they moved to 12-4 in terms of game score. This is a very good team. They're not perfect, they're not entirely complete, but they are significantly better than Reddit would lead you to believe, not only in previous post-match threads, but in this one as well. Basically, all of them talk about how this NIP team is not going to be consistent throughout the entirety of the year, that there's no way they keep this up. And while, yes, this is against EDG, it's not necessarily like the toughest opponent. In fact, it's probably the easiest opponent in the entire league at the current moment. Still, there's a lot to like about this team, and there's a lot to say that is positive about them. And then for EDG, It's the opposite. This team sucks. There's really not a lot of good going on. There's really nothing else I can say at this point. There are players at least trying to make proactive plays, but for the most part, this team is just lost in every lane, on every single facet, every front of the game. They just can't play. They're really not a League of Legends team that can compete at any level. Like, this would be a 10th place team in the LCS, 1000%. There's no positives to take away from this team at the current moment and how they play, but let's go ahead and talk about it. For NIP, player of the series is going to go to Rookie once again here. He's just so good at being able to generate small leads and to the point that they accumulate into one big lead. It's really crazy how consistently he's able to get gold advantages on his opponent. Again, Fisher's really not the best laner, but he has been significantly better in the last couple of weeks than he was in the first couple of weeks in the isolated 1v1s, and Rookie really just kind of destroyed him, was everywhere on the map, was super active. Maybe he wasn't doing as much damage as you would like, but again, MR, armor, all that kind of stuff is so strong right now that just because the Ori isn't immediately bursting people in game number 2 doesn't mean that Rookie isn't doing a great job. The positioning, the CC ability of both Hwei and Orianna, it was massive. He continues to look amazing for this NIP team. It's clear that he wanted to come back here. It's clear that basically no matter who he played with, he wanted to be in this organization again, and he's making it worth it. He is playing so much better than he did really at any point in 2023. I want to give a big credit or a big shout out to Aki as well. Very under the radar, like very good player. I'm not going to say he's a top 3 jungler or anything like that, but top 5 I think is very realistic to say about Aki. I don't know if I would put him in the top 5. I think he would certainly be in the conversation, but this guy just wins tempo every single game. This is what I'm talking about, where sometimes you can blame junglers for being a little bit worse. Like someone like Wei, you can blame him because his lanes aren't, or you can kind of forgive him because his lanes aren't winning, and so there's really not a lot to do. But great junglers, players like Aki, they generate tempo for their laners regardless of how their laners are playing. That's how good he can be at times, and he was awesome this series on the Xin Zhao. Shanji is solid. Really hasn't been the game-changing presence yet that he was on OMG, but he's been fine to start this year for NIP. Is still winning lane, just isn't really translating that into any sort of strong side pressure, but Photic and Juo, I think, have been better than people think they have been. Photic is somebody who obviously always gets a lot of positive praise and feedback, and, generally is just liked by the community, and I think he has earned it for a lot of this year. He has played a lot better in 2024 than, in my opinion, he has played at any point in his entire career. This is the best version of Photic that we have seen in terms of a complete package. Obviously, he was awful last year, one of the, most destructive players towards his team's winning percentage in the entire league, and, I thought Juo was actually pretty good last year, and Juo certainly hasn't been as good this year as he was last year, but I think a lot of the negative talk about him is certainly blown out of proportion. I see constant talk every single time that NIP will never be a top team with Juo at support, and while generally I would believe that, Juo's certainly not a top 5 support or anything like that, you could definitely upgrade at that position. I don't think he's been bad enough to say that they cannot win without, that they can't win with him. I think that would be a crazy thing to say, because I do think Photic and Juo have developed a bit more chemistry, and they play off of Rookie really well, who does spend a lot of time trying to generate prio for his bot lane, so generally I think this team's just constructed really well, and I think they play around their power spikes and their styles very well, and I think that's better than maybe the individual talent that's on NIP. But for EDG on the other side, this team's just bad. I mean, really, what else do you want me to say? They're not good. Jeje, tried to make some plays on the brand, but he was so far forward on all of them. I almost gave him dud of the series. It feels like he is starting to give up. Not that he is completely given up, because again, he tried in game number 2, but you really know that a player is starting to feel it when they go for consistent 50-50s. That's just never something you want to see out of a player who was as, I guess stable as Jeje was for so long. It's just not good right now. Solo kill is not good in the top lane. I get it, he's the only top laner they have that practices, but he's not good at playing the game. Vampire might be the least talented player in the LPL. He's going to get done of the series here. We talked about how players like Beishwan and Vikla, they've started the season really slow. Even the Snake, right? They've started the season really slow and maybe worse than Vampire has in terms of their performances, but I think Vampire in terms of expectation is the lowest player in the league for me. I don't think there has been a game where I've been Vampire did good stuff consistently for EDG. He's just not an LPL caliber player. This is what happens when you skip the LDL entirely, is you get a player that is just not ready to play at this level and is getting absolutely destroyed. He was not good. Fisher, again, he's fine. He's probably the best performing player on this team. Maybe Jeje, right? But Fisher's pretty close to becoming the best performing player on this team, and that's really saying something because he's not been particularly good. The Snake is awful. So so many teams need AD carry, and EDG might be at the top of that list. It's just a disaster for Edward Gaming. There's only so many words I can use to describe it. They're 0-7 to start the year. This is the worst team in the LPL. But for NIP, this is one of the better teams in the LPL. I don't care that their schedule's been easy. I truly do believe that they're going to beat the teams that are around them. Are they better than Weibo? Yeah. Are they better than LNG? Probably. Are they better than, WE? Probably. That's top 4. Like, if you're better than those teams, you're a top 4 team in the LPL right now. That's where we're at. And so for me, NIP is a top 4 team very clearly. And while I still think the top 3 are a bit out of reach for them, I think Rookie is good enough at the current moment to push them into that. And their weak links aren't as weak as I thought they would be going into the year. This is a much more well-rounded team than I was expecting, and that is a huge positive for them. And now moving on to day number 6. Remember, this is a super big week, a super week, if you will, which means we are still 3 days away from the end of the week. We have day 6, we have day 7, and we have day 8 to cover on this channel. So getting right into day number 6, we kicked it off with a matchup between FunPlus Phoenix and LGD Gaming. And FunPlus picks up another win here. FPX moves to 4-3 on the season, and they're actually doing pretty good. Could this be a playoff team? Honestly, at the beginning of the split, I didn't think so. I didn't think they were looking all that good. I didn't expect them to look all that good, but they have kind of blown a lot of those expectations out the water. They've been incredibly consistent over the past couple of series, and you're really just hoping that they're building upon kind of the foundation that they had last year, right? They had a couple of good players that they wanted to build upon. Xiao Lao, who finally started to show an ounce of development in 2023. He was better in this series. Care, I thought, was really good last year. And even if he hasn't started off really hot, Milky Way coming in as a rookie, Dectum and Life Year 2 imports, I think have both been positive additions to this team so far. This split, FPX is just kind of clicking right now, and especially in a landscape where there really aren't a lot of good teams in the LPL, or at least consistently good teams in the LPL. It's nice to see a team like FPX actually be able to step up and make things work. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to go again to Milky Way in the jungle. He's just so good at being able to carry games. That's really something that I think people are going to have to start dealing with. He reminds me so much of Xiao Hao when he was early in his career on Anyone's Legend in terms of just being able to take over games on like marksman style carry champions, similar to a player like Meteor on the other side of this matchup in that regard. Being able to play things like we saw the Kindred in the previous series or the Graves in game number 3 of this series. It's just a really good thing to be able to see him on high damage champions and actually be able to kind of carry games in those circumstances. I think that that's a big positive. He wasn't the only one in this series able to carry games for his team. I still think that his performance earlier this week was probably a bit more impressive in terms of just the solo carry performance, but he has been the best player on this team, and that's really, really fun to be able to say for someone who wasn't even starting at the beginning of the split for them. But I think the entire top side of the map was very positive here. Care had his best series in a while. I do think his scoreline is perhaps a tad bit better than what he played. He just kind of got to capitalize on some Azir power spikes, and that's generally good for team fighting, but he didn't really make any mistakes. His laning was fine, and that's really a positive. I still think Care needs to be better if this team wants to guarantee themselves a playoff spot. There are simply too many good mid laners in the LPL right now for him to be what is a lower half one in terms of the performances that he's given over the beginning of this year, but this was a really good step in that direction. Haichao has not been bad to start this year at all. In fact, Haichao has certainly been better than Care to start this year. So to see Care actually just be better than him, especially in the back half of these games, it's very, very good. Xiao Lao, who was definitely better here, wasn't so good in their loss in game number 1, but games 2, 3, he definitely rebounded. His team fighting got a bit better. He's a lot more stable than he was 2 years ago as a player, just generally. I trust him to be able to come back from some of the bad games that he had. And I think Life has very underratedly been great for this team. I know he's not going to get a lot of positive publicity because people turned on him last year because Hanwha Life was such a watch team and Viper is such a popular player, and people always look for scapegoats on popular teams, and generally I think Life was bad last year. He wasn't good. I'm not saying that he didn't deserve a lot of the negatives, but just as he deserved kind of a lot of the criticism that he received last year, I think he deserves a lot of praise for being able to turn that around so quickly this year. Generally, I just think FPX is a solid team, and LGD's fine. Like, they're not a bad team. Picking up a win here isn't awful. I mean, this team is sitting at 8-11 in terms of game score. That's really not all that bad. They're certainly better than anybody could have anticipated. Meteor and Haichao, I think, were fine. Ironically enough, Xiaoyev was fine this series. This was probably the best series they got out of an AD carry across this entire year up until this point. It's just not been good for LGD in that regard, but unfortunately, top lane let them down here. Bertle's going to get done of the series. This is kind of the opposite of what was happening in the first couple of weeks, where Bertle and Haichao and Meteor, specifically Bertle and Haichao, were playing playing really well and playing really fast and winning lane and being able to exert a lot of pressure, whereas the bot lane was just getting absolutely torched every single game. It was the opposite in this series, where Bertle, I think, really struggled to be able to maintain any sort of pressure. Xiao Lahu can do that. He's a good laner. He's somebody who can put pressure on the opponent, but Bertle needs to be better than a player like Xiao Lahu. That's the end of that story. I had them, I think, right next to each other in terms of my top lane rankings, and so I'm not shocked to see this, but if LGD wants to be good, Bertle has to be more of what he was in weeks 1 and 2 rather than what he has been here in week number 4. But you know, credit to Meteor. I thought he was really solid here, especially in their win on the Xin Zhao, Xiaoya, and Jin Zhao. They just got to stay even remotely playable, right? Like, this was the best series they've had as a duo, and they just need to continue to build upon that. They don't need to be great. They just need to be good enough, because Haichao has been playing really well, even if he wasn't great in this series, and Meteor has good moments. He's very good on carry picks, and so there are avenues and opportunities for LGD to be able to win series like this. I don't think they're a playoff team, but they're going to stay relevant, I think, throughout most of this year. They're just simply overperforming their talent level at the moment. And for FPX, they're also overperforming, but I think it's something that is a little bit more sustainable for them. I think right now, it's really hard not to say that this team is a playoff team. They're above 500. They're, you know, in good form. They have a really good jungler and, you know, soul laners that I would expect to actually play better than what they're playing like right now. I think this team is actually really interesting to watch, and that's certainly not what I expected at the beginning of the year. Then moving on to our second series of day number 6 here, and this is actually a very interesting clash of two teams, very close in perception. Invictus Gaming taking on Team WE, and WE with a massive win here. This is a very, like, defining win for them. They haven't been as consistent as maybe you would like at the beginning of this split, but this is a big one. Invictus is very hot right now. This is a team that obviously has a ton of cohesion with, you know, now 4 of the 5 players coming back from summer of last year. They've started off incredibly well, and honestly, a lot of these players have really grown. It feels like they know exactly what kind of play style they want to have to try and maximize their players, and WE came out and just beat them. Yes, they lost game number 1, but games 2 and 3 were very WE favored, and you gotta give a lot of credit to this team. I think the change that they made at the beginning of this week was actually a really positive change for them as well, with Stay coming in. As much as I love Prince, and trust me, I still like Prince, I still think that it's not fair to really judge his tenure here on WE as anything other than, well, you know, he was given a shot and he didn't blend well with the support, but Stay and Awandi have very good chemistry as a duo. You're getting way more out of your support with the new AD carry, but we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about my player of the series first and foremost, and that is, once again, going to go to Wayward in the top lane, who genuinely might be the best player in the LPL right now. I mean, the dude is popping off. Shout out to all the haters who said that he could never be like a top-tier top laner. Obviously, he hasn't proven it entirely just yet. This is just the beginning of the regular season, but the dude has been absolutely decimating everybody that he is going up against. You should know me has been having a really good split and has really started to come along as a very complete player and a very good young top lane prospect. Wayward destroyed him in these last 2 games, and I get it. K'Sante is really strong, and you can blame a lot of it on the champion, but Wayward has genuinely been phenomenal so far in 2024. Again, sometimes players are just put in situations that they're not going to be at their best in. Wayward was good in 80% of top esports games, as I've said for multiple years on this channel. He just, you know, the 20% is what's stuck in people's minds, because in those 80% of games where he was playing well, his teammates were playing better, and that's just how it ended up, how it ended up going on a team that he was really talented on. But Wayward has always been a really good top laner. He's just now getting resources and now being asked to play a bigger role, which he always was capable of doing. It's really, really good stuff coming in from him. He has been genuinely, I can't overstate just how good he has been. He has the most player of the series awards of anybody in the LPL for me so far, and it's not close. Like, he is killing it right now. I want to give a big shout out to Fofo as well. He is going super under the radar for how good he is, just like he was last year on EDG. He was a big piece of why EDG was very good in the spring split, and obviously he was fine in summer. That team had more problems than just Fofo in summer. I think Uzi and Mako just didn't mesh well as a bot lane duo, but Fofo has always been a very synergistic mid laner in terms of how he can adapt to the rest of his team, and he continues to be one of the best in the entire league. I get it. He's an easy player to scapegoat, and, you know, EDG is one of those big teams. I talk about these big teams all the time. Teams with big fan bases, those are the kinds of teams that get scapegoats, and Fofo was a scapegoat for EDG last year. Mako at times was a bit of that as well, but Fofo has always been a really solid mid, and he has also had a very good start to this split. Wayward and Fofo have been the stars for this WE team, and honestly, this this might be a top 5 or top 6 team in the league. Stay looks great in the bot lane. You know, again, I want to make it clear, I think Prince would do really well in a lot of circumstances. I just think Stay clearly has better chemistry with the Wandy and the isolated 2v2. They like to play the game in very similar ways, and Stay has really been able to pop off in that regard. He played Twisted Fate bot and he absolutely dominated on it. Really good stuff. Wandy has looked instantly better ever since Stay came in. It's just very clear to me that this is better for this iteration of WE, even if Prince is a better player, in my opinion. In the grand scheme of things, Hang was good in this series, still can get a little bit better, a little bit more aggro in the early game, but with his lanes winning so much, so consistently, his job becomes infinitely easier. This WE team is genuinely scary, because this isn't just a regular team that they beat. Invictus is very good, and, you know, I'm not going to freak out too much about this loss. They played game number 1 really well. You Should Know Me and Leon really popped off in that first game. It was the rest of this series where things started to go wrong. Leon, in general, still looked really good across all 3 of these games, was definitely the bright spot, I would say, of Invictus, but everything else was not so good. Dead of the series is going to go to You Should Know Me. He was amazing in game number 1 on the Gwen, but he got railed. Like, he got blasted in games 2 and 3. It was not close. It was really kind of a major regression from him in those last 2 games. You have to hope that it's just because Wayward is absolutely on fire right now. He cannot be stopped. You have to hope that that's the case for You Should Know Me, but the game 2 Udyr, the game 3 Gwen, they were both really bad, and neither of them were able to even remotely touch Wayward in the laning phase or out of the laning phase. I want to give a big shout out to On, who was also really terrible in this series. I very much debated giving him dead of the series. I don't think he was as bad as You Should Know Me in games 2 and 3, but I do think he was worse in game number 1, so however you want to end up divvying that up, but On was really bad, You Should Know Me was bad. Cryin and Leon never really got a chance to get off the ground. I thought they were fine, and Wink generally doesn't really make that many mistakes. It's just WE creating a lot of opportunities for themselves by outplaying their opponents in isolated matchups. It's the individual mechanics that are really separating WE right now, and that's what makes me feel so confident in them. It really does feel like their macro's getting on point. WE's a scary team. Like, I'm not going to say that they're a Worlds team or anything like that, but are they really all that far away from that, especially with how the top tier of the LPL is? Like, IG is a really good team, and I'm not super worried about this loss for them. I think this means more in a positive direction for WE, and that's just got to be exciting for a team that very recently went 0-16. And then moving on to our third series of day number 6 here, and what's supposed to be a top matchup turned into something just a little bit less interesting. It's LNG Esports taking on Top Esports, and TES picks up another win here, another 2-0. They moved to 11-2 in terms of game score to start this year, 5-1 in terms of series score. Their only loss being to Bilibili. They're doing everything they should be doing at the start of this split. They have been basically exactly what they have supposed to been at the start of this split, but LNG is a disaster at the moment, and it's everything. It's not one thing, it's not 2 things, it's not 3 things, it's not 4 things, it's not even 5 things. It's the coaching staff, it's the organization decisions, it's the players, it's everything that is not working right now for LNG. And it's really disappointing. This was a team that was very much on the up and up at the end of last year. They made summer finals. They were one of the top 2 teams in the LPL last year, and here we are, and they're 2-5, and I don't even know if this team is going to be like anything other than a first-round playoff out at their current state. I know, obviously, their schedule has been brutal at the beginning, and it's very likely they go on a pretty big winning streak down the stretch, but can confidence in this team really be recovered after what they have shown against any competent team so far this split? I just don't know, so we'll talk about them later, but let's talk about TES. Again, they're everything they're supposed to be, and then some. Player of the series is going to go to Tion. What a jungle canyon coming in from Tion in this series. I mean, truly a massive gap in the jungle in this series. 2 Lee Sin games where he was able to get pressure super quick and super early and basically shut Weiwei off of being able to make any play that he could make throughout the entirety of this game. It was very impressive stuff, about as clinical as you can get in the jungle. Tion had a little bit of a slow start. Him and Cream didn't necessarily work together super well in week 1, but it's been working better in the last couple of weeks. You know, take a shot every time I say that in this video, I guess. People have gotten better. What a shock after Lunar New Year. It's pretty fun to watch, but Tion was awesome. I think Cream is obviously really good. He's a really good Hwei. That's something that I think has kind of gone under the radar so far this split, is he's actually been pretty good at this new champ, and so that's pretty fun to see. Akali was really solid. Obviously, it's a signature champion for a reason. He's not going to do bad on it. Jackie, Love, and Mako were great. Mako in particular. Love watching him on Enchanters. He's really good on Engagers. Obviously, that's kind of a bit of a specialty for him, but he's really good on Enchanters as well. Really not a lot you can knock Jackie, Love, and Mako for. I said earlier this week that they are likely the best 2v2 like bot lane right now in terms of just early early game laning, and that very much stands true in this series as well, going up against Gala and Hong, who we will talk about. And then 369 continues to just dominate his own lane on the top side. TES is just better than a lot of the teams that they run into. Am I concerned that potentially maybe when they face the best teams in the world, they're going to need a bit more cohesion, a bit more synergy amongst their players? They're going to need to play towards late game a bit more. Perhaps that could be something that could concern somebody, but they're so talented and they win so consistently individually that it's really hard to imagine this team being anything other than one of the best teams in the entire world, basically at any point throughout this year. Everybody's clicking, even Tian and Cream, who are a little bit questionable. Now, again, want to see more consistency out of this team. 5-1 is great. You got to be able to keep it up. We know Top Esports is great during the beginning of splits. We need to see them be able to maintain that throughout the entirety of spring, but at least from what they've shown now, yeah, it's all coming together for them. But for LNG, it's the opposite. 2-5 is very indicative of what this team is. 7-11 in terms of game score. They're just not clicking. Everything is going wrong, and again, I don't want to blame one player. Even if it's a player that I am lower on, I'm not going to blame one player here. Weiwei is going to get done of the series, and he got mega gapped in the jungle, but again, this is bigger than just Weiwei, although I do want to point out, for those of you who are keeping track, which is me, Weiwei has the same player of the game / dud of the game score as Vikla this split. Just something to keep in mind, but Weiwei has not been particularly good. He's just not fit this team at all. His mentality of being super aggro, of really trying to skirmish early on in games and trying to snowball out of control rather than, playing safe, playing a little bit more macro-oriented, playing to gain advantages, try to pull teams apart and play these 4v3 map styles, split push a lot. Like, that's what LNG did at a really high level last year, and Weiwei just doesn't do any of those things, and so you drag and drop a player who just doesn't synergistically fit with anybody else on this roster and just expect him to be able to pick up the slack. It's not working, and it's very, very clear. Whether it's on carries like Brand, whether it's on engagers like Maokai, it's just not working. Hong came back in here in the support position. He fits this team more in terms of playstyle. He's going to be a little bit more focused on being able to team fight in the back half of games than someone like Mark, who's a bit more lane focused, really wants to try and move around the map, be aggressive, play those really aggressive and engage-oriented supports. That's not Hong. He's more willing to play the Milio and things like that, or at least he's certainly better at it than a player like Mark. So I like that decision to go and put him back in the lineup, but Weiwei is just so at odds with the rest of this team, specifically Scout in the mid lane, that I just don't really know if this team could ever actually be good with him in it. Not because he's bad, but because these players just simply don't work well together. Weiwei's certainly not playing well. He's going for a lot. He's clearly tilted. I've said that about a couple of players so far. He is clearly going for more 50-50s than he would have last year because he doesn't trust that the rest of his team is going to be able to pick up that slack, but Scout is playing significantly worse. He doesn't have any sort of mid lane prio. He's not winning 1v1 like he was last year. Gala is certainly not doing anything in the bot lane. Zika's getting destroyed in laning phases. It's just kind of all going wrong. I'm not going to pull the the panic trigger on this and say they're not a playoff team. They're not the same as a team like RNG or EDG that has just completely lost the plot this year. They're fine in terms of being able to beat the bottom tier teams. I just think all that they have shown so far this split is that they're not going to be able to compete near the top of the LPL standings, and that is the goal. Remember, this team was in the finals of the LPL last year. They might be the 8th, the 7th best team in the LPL. That's where we're at with LNG, and that's definitely a disappointment, and I think that's why people are upset, but I don't really see a reason for this to get better. Unless things completely change, unless their playstyle completely changes, I don't really see a reason that this team is not going to be this for the rest of the year, which is sad. But for Top Esports, they are hopefully going to be like this for the rest of the year. They are going to be solid. They are going to be one of the best teams in the LPL. There really is nothing stopping this team from winning the LPL, from being on the same level as Bilibili and LGD Gaming and these other teams. I want to see them be able to actually beat those teams before I anoint them in that category, especially after kind of getting destroyed by Bilibili. But this is a very, very solid team, one that I'm very much expecting to continue this positive momentum for the rest of the split. And then moving on now to day number 7, somehow, some way, not the final day of the week. We've got 8 days to cover in today's video. It's a long one. I appreciate you guys sticking around for it, but kicking off day number 7, it was a matchup between two teams with a combined 2 series wins. ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Ultra Prime. And ThunderTalk, thankfully, is able to pick up this win. It would have been disastrous if they had lost this series. This week has really not gone according to plan for them. A lot of these players are very much underperforming at the current moment. To at least be able to pick up a win over Ultra Prime was necessary for this roster. For Ultra Prime, at least you were able to win a game, again, staying relatively competitive against teams that are just more talented than you, even in circumstances where you have potential to win. Like, Uakai is playing well. Hacker is honestly really kind of okay for this this team, and Doggo I think is fine so long as he's not in these horrendous matchups, but ThunderTuck is better than Ultra Prime. Like, it has been very, very clear that even with Ultra Prime kind of overperforming in some of these games, they're really not like a playoff caliber team or anything like that, like ThunderTuck has the potential to be. So let's talk about it. Player of the series for me is pretty obviously going to go to Chocho in the support position. I criticized him a lot earlier this week because he wasn't playing well. Him and 1xN really have not, kind of gotten off to a hot start as a duo, if you will, but this was him getting back to his roots. The Heimerdinger in game number 2, that's something that is familiar to him as a player, and the Renata honestly was even better in game number 3, in my opinion. Just great stuff coming in from Chocho, who really needed to, step up and show something in this series. I think, he's going into Doggo and Jue, who really are not like the pinnacle of bot lanes. Like, this was the series to get back on track if you were 1xN and Chocho, and that's exactly what they did. Really happy to be able to see that. The Milio in game 1 was okay as well. Not perfect, but was okay, but it really was the Heimerdinger and the Renata that were able to take over this series. I want to give a big shout out to Beishuan. Easily the best series he's played all year. He has been a disaster in the jungle for ThunderTuck, but he finally came out here and had a good series, and it was on some more aggressive carry-oriented champions. He's definitely more well-known for the Sejuani and the Maokai and the Zac and things like that, but he can play Viego, and he can still pop off and get resets and be really useful in fights. Maybe going more in that direction rather than being a facilitator is actually going to be more beneficial towards ThunderTuck in the short term. If you can get him on something that's going to be a bit more comfortable, perhaps he can just exert at least a little bit more pressure on the map like he was able to do here, maybe get to the late game where he was always a bit better as a player, just kind of theory crafting there, but generally I think that could be a good idea. Yukao was good in this series, even if Yuakai was maybe just a little bit better on the other side of this matchup, and like I said, 1xN was actually pretty solid here too, but I think Chocho and Beishuan, the two players that I think have been the worst for this, well, I shouldn't say that, because Hoya has been pretty bad for this team, but two of the more underperformers on this team, two of the bigger underperformers on this team stepping up and being the reason that they were able to pick up their second series win of the year. Hoya still struggling, but was certainly better in team fights, just really not a good laner. It's lucky he was going into Decade, who is one of the worst players in the LPL. He's going to get dead of the series yet again here for Ultra Prime. It's funny because Hacker and Yuakai have developed a pretty interesting synergy where Yuakai gets a lot of resources from Hacker early on in games, and it really does translate into Yuakai being able to take over in the mid to late game. I think Hacker is doing a better job than he's getting credit for in terms of being able to enable this mid lane to really pop off. I think Doggo has certainly been better. Jue, I think I've criticized a lot in the recent weeks, and I certainly don't think this series was a ton better, but he's not the worst player in the entire world. In fact, I really liked his tape in the LDL, but Decade is just a disaster. He's nothing. On the top side, he wins in 0 portions of the game. He's not a good laner. He's not a good team fighter. I get it. I hear it all the time that this guy, destroyed the LDL, was really good. I went back and watched some of the LDL tape. It was good. It wasn't phenomenal, but it was solid, and I understand why people would be excited about him, but he is just not good enough to play at the LPL level. Reminds me a lot of what's going on with Nayu right now over on Rare Atom, where it's just yeah, that player dominated the LDL, but he's not in a situation where he's ever going to be able to translate that in his current predicament. That's Decade, who's just getting destroyed in every single matchup that he plays. Ultra Prime is a relatively interesting team, maybe not a crazy interesting team, but Hacker and Yuakai as a duo definitely have some positives going for them. Yuakai in particular, who can carry games, is definitely good enough to win games on his own, as we've seen throughout the year, and as we saw in this series, they were able to take that game number 1. They've won a lot of games, just not a lot of series over the course of this year. They have 6 game wins in their 8 series. That's not bad considering the team's 1-7. Obviously it's not good in the grand scheme of things, but for 1-7, that's really not all that bad. They win a game in most of their series. The problem is that they can't close it out. They're not consistent enough. They have a one-dimensional play style, and they're just not getting enough big performances from their weaker players like Decade and like Jue at the current moment, who simply need to be better. Even Doggo, I think, needs to step up and be a little bit more of a takeover force that we kind of knew him as a couple of years ago back in the PCS. But Hacker and Yuakai are doing okay, Yuakai in particular, and Ultra Prime is what it is. I'm not freaking out about this team at all. And then for ThunderTuck, I still don't think that I'm changing my mind about this team too much. Beating Ultra Prime doesn't completely change my perception of what this team is, but maybe they're not a bottom 3 team. I think that's generally a positive thing to say. I need to see Beishuan and Chocho and Hoya all survive against actual good teams, even 1xN actually survive against good teams, or even teams that are just around them in terms of the power rankings, teams like FPX, teams like Anyone's Legend, teams in that zone. They need to be able to go toe-to-toe with those teams, and they've just not been able to do that over the course of this split up until this point. So yes, this is a good win for them, and you've got to be excited about it, but you don't want to freak out and overreact to a win over Ultra Prime. And then moving on to our second series of day number 7, a very interesting clash between two teams really not on hot streaks right now. It's RNG taking on Rare Atom. And Rare Adam is going to pick up another very impressive victory here in week number 4. They've gone from winless to 2 wins in a week. They went 2-1 across their 3 series this week. A pretty good week for them overall, all things considered. And honestly, their players are playing a lot better. It seems they fixed at least some of their core issues coming out of the Lunar New Year break. But for RNG on the other side of this, it is just not good. This team is really bad in their current state. I definitely overestimated them by keeping them in the playoffs after last week. This is not a playoff team at all in their current state. They might even be a bottom 4, bottom 3 team in the LPL. It's kind of crazy. EDG and RNG are both like some of the worst teams in the LPL at the current moment. I don't think anybody could have seen that coming last year, but here we are, and, we'll obviously talk about this series, but we'll talk about Rare Adam first and foremost. I really like how they played in this series. I think a lot of people are going to overlook that the individual performances of these players have gotten significantly better. I understand that their macro is still awful. I'm not going to sit here and try and tell you that Rare Adam is a playoff team or that, they're clearly like way better than their record or anything like that. They're not. This is still not a very good League of Legends team. They still have a lot to work on, but the talent, the individual mechanics are coming through on some of these players, specifically on their solo laners, who I think both looked relatively good in this series. Player of the series is going to go to Xiaoshu in the top lane. It's mostly for that Cassante game in game number 3, where he just completely ran the map. I mean, game 3, as soon as he got online, was over. There was just nothing else that anybody was going to be able to do in that game. We'll talk about Breathe in a second. He had a really bad week for RNG, which is unfortunate because he was the only player on this team that was actually playing well at the beginning of the season. But, Xiaoshu was awesome in this series. The Cassante looked great. Even the Udyr was fine. It wasn't dominant, but it was fine. And, taking over the game on Cassante is definitely an important thing to do because that champion just has so many tools to be able to end games so quickly. It's nice to see Xiaoshu get a little bit more comfortable in the top lane. Hopefully, that development curve that he was showing over the course of last year, where I was giving him my rookie of the split in the summer split, hopefully that can continue over the course of 2024. Hasn't exactly been a hot start, but there's been so many problems with this team, I don't want to entirely blame it on him. This was a really good series. Vikla was also a lot better here. He was amazing in game number 1. Want to give him a big shout out on the Hui. He's actually been a lot better. I understand that he's going to be a bit more feast or famine. He wasn't great in their second series this week, but he was very good in both of their wins. And you could argue that he has been the most influential player towards their wins of anybody on the roster. And that's a pretty important thing to say. I still don't want to completely change my thoughts and opinions on Vikla about, him being a little bit lower on the totem pole, clearly losing a step and a lot of that confidence that he had before he went over to the LCS. But, he just needs to build that mental back up. I really do think that's going to be the big blocker for him, is it's never really been a mechanic issue. It's always been about the plays that he chooses to make. He always has just chose to make less than optimal plays. If you can wrangle him in a bit, especially if players like Nayu and Xiaoshu can start playing better, then I do think that Rare Adam has the potential to be a team that isn't bottom 3 in the LPL. But Xiaoshu, Vikla looked good. Nayu looked a lot better. I really like him on aggressive picks. Big shocker. Marksman in the jungle in the LPL have a ridiculously good win rate right now. Graves, Kindred. I understand these champions aren't the strongest they've been ever at the current moment, but both of them are very good champions, and clearly, LPL junglers play them at a super high level. I would expect their play rate to increase over the next few weeks, but it was really top side of the map that won this for RA. Asum and Zora continue to just kind of be there. They were the worst of the 2 bot lanes in this series, which is not really what you want to see, but they have not been good all year long, either isolated in the 2v2 or actually following up and capitalizing on the few and far between good plays that Rare Adam makes on the top side of the map. They're just not a very good bot lane, but if Xiaoshu can continue to develop, if Vikla can get some of that confidence and that mental back, Nayu's an interesting prospect. I think there is enough talent here to be not a bottom team in the LPL. I'm just not sold that they're going to be anything other than a playoff team, because beating RNG isn't anything special at this point. This team is just bad. There really is no other way to put it. LWX was back in here. LP didn't play very well in their first series this week, and so LWX comes back in, and honestly, this might be the best series that this bot lane has had since week 1 or week 2. This was pretty solid, and it does look like he's finally starting to get a bit more comfortable on these enchanters. Obviously, we've talked about how the Ashe is not necessarily his go-to pick, and he still was very questionable on the Ashe. He was a bit better in this series. I do want to shout that out. He was the best player for RNG, in my opinion, across all 3 games, but it was the Renata game that looked good, and I think LWX did a better job of capitalizing on the Kalista. I think, hopefully they're starting to develop some level of consistency in the bot lane. Their 2v2s were just better. I understand that they were playing, Varus into Senna or Kalista Kalista into Senna or Kalista into Varus, which are all winning matchups isolated in the 2v2, but you still need to be able to execute on those, lane matchups, and that's something that they just weren't able to do at the beginning of the year. And so credit to the RNG bot lane, but outside of that, everybody else was very questionable, at least in terms of the grand scheme of things. Wei and Tongyuan took turns actually being relatively strong in some of these games. Wei was pretty good in game number 1, but was really bad in game number 3, and Tongyuan was really good in game number 3. On the Akali, was able to get a lot of resets and fight, but was really bad on the Orianna at the beginning of this series. You're just gonna have to take the good with the bad. Neither of them have been consistent at all this split. Wei certainly hasn't been. Tongyuan is a bottom tier mid laner in the LPL, I should say. Vikla definitely outplayed him for most of this series, which is never really what you want to see when Vikla is not playing well at the current moment. But dud of the series is pretty easily going to go to Breathe for me in the top lane. Xiaoshu just obliterated him in these matchups. He was not relevant in any of these games. And, I think what we're learning is that if Breathe is not winning on the top side, RNG just has no chance to win. He is the best player on this team. He is the one that's kind of dragging them forward in terms of results and outcomes, and if he's losing isolated in laning phase, and if the enemy top laner is going to be able to generate a lot of advantages against him, I just don't really see a lot of ways for RNG to be able to win, because there's nobody else on this team that is like a carry for them. If LWX and Ming can become that, if Wei can somehow get back on track, if Tongyuan can show any of the development that he was showing towards the end of 2023 summer, then maybe you have an opportunity for this team to be more relevant. But in their current state, it really does feel like Breathe either wins in the top lane or he loses and they lose the game, and that really is kind of what RNG has become. This is one of the worst teams in the LPL. I don't know where they're going to go in my power rankings, but I can assure you, after this loss, they are not going to be in my top 10 anymore. But for Rare Adam, again, really nice week. You went from winless, not only in terms of game score, but series score, but also in terms of game score. You were, winless across every game that you had played, to actually going above 500 in terms of your week 4 schedule. That's really positive. 2-1 this week is nice. You're still 2-5, not the best record in the entire world. You still only have 4 wins to your 12 losses, which is certainly not the position that you want to be in, but things are getting better for them, and I think that's really just the direction you want to see. But then moving into our third series of day number 7, and this was the series of the week that everybody was looking forward to, and in my opinion, it did live up to the expectations. JD Gaming taking on Bilibili Gaming, the top 2 teams in the LPL, and Bilibili Gaming is going to pick up a massive 2-1 win in this series, of course, dropping their first series of the year. Coming out of the Lunar New Year break, there were concerns about how difficult their schedule was going to get, and how they really needed to make sure that they kept their foot on the gas to prove that they were the number 1 team in the LPL, like I and a lot of other people had been saying they are. And they come out here against JD Gaming and they do exactly that. They looked fantastic in this series. JDG, to their credit, I think also looked good, specifically Ruler, who looked amazing in this series, but Bilibili was just a little bit too much. Their cohesion, a little bit too much for JDG to actually handle. They played really well across all 3 of these games. All 3 of them were close. All 3 of them were bangers. Big ups to this series. It's basically everything that we could have asked for from the top 2 teams going head-to-head against each other. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Elk in the bot lane. I've been kind of critical of Elk. He's really been the one player on this team, maybe him and Bin, that have not dominated in the way that we kind of became accustomed to last year. Like, they were winning, but a lot of the advantages that they were generating in the top and in the bot lane were just kind of marginal. They were marginal advantages, and Elk really wasn't given a lot of resources in team fights, and On was moving around the map, creating a lot of plays, and Shun was really controlling the tempo and dominating early games, and Knight was their team fight carry and was playing carries and also, supportive picks at a super high level. Like, there had just been a lot more things to point out in terms of like, wow, big standout plays from Bilibili outside of top and bot lane, but it's really nice to see when the games matter the most, Elk is still capable of stepping up and going head to head and dueling with Ruler in terms of being able to carry the series. Both of them were genuinely phenomenal in this series, but Elk was just a little bit better, got a little bit more help from his team, and that's why they're going to come out on top. I still believe that this team from top to bottom is the most talented in the LPL, and I think, Elk really stepping up and showing that here is a big reason why. He wasn't the only one. Big credit to On Really love Caitlyn Lux. I think it's underplayed globally at the current moment. I just think anything that you can dominate laning phase on is just generally very good. Like, Kalista is super highly prioritized for a reason. I think Caitlyn Lux gives you a lot of that, just doesn't give you the, consistency in terms of, killing, but it does give you a lot of that early, lane advantage. It doesn't give you as much mid-game power, but there is a lot to like about this lane, and I think we saw that specifically in game number 1, but the Tristana Nautilus in game number 3 really allowed On to play super proactive and allowed him to really create a lot for his team, whether that was through engages or through peeling for Elk, who could dominate fights on the Tristana. Big credit to Knight. He continues to play these more supportive picks more frequently than he plays carries, although he's still going to get the reputation of being a resource-heavy player that isn't ever going to be on a winning team. Just is what it is. That's how LPL fans are. But the Karma, the Talia, those kinds of things are really successful for Bilibili. They've been super successful all split long up until this point. Knight can do it all, and he was very good at being that secondary, facilitator, almost support-like player in this series, generating advantages in his own isolated lane phase against the player that he replaced that's supposed to be the king of doing that in Yagao. Credit to Bin. This might have been his best series of the year. June was really good, especially down the stretch. He could have been a bit more consistent in the early game, but that's just nitpicking. He really, this was the worst week he's had this season, and that's really saying something because he just beat LGD Gaming and definitely was the better jungler out of the two in this series. Just credit to Bilibili. This is the best team in the LPL, and they certainly have an argument to be made that they are the best team in the world right now. And then for JDG on the other side, I have to shout out Ruler. There's just nothing else to say. 99% of series you win when Ruler plays like this if you're not playing the best team in the world. But unfortunately, you were playing the best team in the world, and so there just wasn't a way for him to win. The Lucian, the Kai'Sa, both of them were really good, specifically game 2 and game 3, where he just was able to dominate. It was the rest of the team that definitely had some problems, topside in particular. Dead of the series is going to go to Flandre. The Twisted Fate just didn't work for me. I understand game 2 was a bit better, but game 1 was very rough for Flandre, and he wasn't particularly good in game 3 either. I debated whether or not to give this to Kanavi as well, who I think was really bad in game 1 on the Xin Zhao. I think that was almost a game-losing Xin Zhao performance from him for a lot of game number 1, and that's really never what you want to see. It doesn't feel like Kanavi is exactly in the form that he was in last year or the year before or 2020. This feels eerily closer to 2021 Kanavi, which I think is definitely disappointing to hear, but he's got plenty of time to be able to get himself back on track, and this is really Flandre's first, bad series of the year, so I'm not freaking out about that. He has jumped back in to the LPL with a vengeance, and he has been phenomenal both in and out of lane for most of this split, so I'm not going to worry that Flandre's not good enough to survive at this level. Bin is a very good player who steps up when the games matter more, and so I'm not freaking out. Yagao could have been a bit better, but, he played his more supportive mid style. He tried to get some engages on Nico, and it just didn't end up working out. Missing was fine. I think he was okay this series. Some of the engages could have been a little bit cleaner, but generally his job was to make sure Ruler had all the tools he needed to be able to win some of these fights, and he did his job. It just wasn't enough. Against most of these teams, most teams in the world, the effort that JDG put out in this series leads to an easy 2-0 victory, or at the very least a 2-1 series win. It's just Bilibili's not like every other team in the world. They are better than a lot of the other teams. They are one of the best teams, and I think they showed that here. Even with their loss that they shouldn't have had earlier this week, this team has staked their claim as the #1 team in the LPL with this victory, and I, for one, am pretty excited to see that. And that's going to bring us to our 8th and final day of LPL Week 4 action. Again, thank you guys so much for sticking around this long. I really, really do appreciate you guys. But let's jump into this 8th and final day, kicking it off with a series that finally happened. A win for the last winless team in the LPL. It's Edward Gaming taking on anyone's legend, and EDG does pick up their first series win of the 2024 season. Congrats to them. Obviously, it's a long time coming for an org that I think a lot of people did not expect this kind of start from. Even the people who were lower on them, like me, where I had them barely in the playoffs. I think most people had them, somewhere around, 8 to 10 or in that zone. Nobody could have predicted them being the worst team in the LPL like they have been over the first couple of weeks, but they are able to pick up a win here. A couple of players coming back in, Ole most notably coming back in the top lane. Even if he's not practicing, even if he's not playing with this team, he is their best chance to win. He is so clearly the best player in the organization at the current moment that, again, even if he's not trying, he's got to be in the lineup. It's just kind of how it is. And then Jeje is out and Monkey is in. This was a little bit of a surprise change for them. Jeje, I think, slipped and got hurt. I don't know the exact story, but as far as I'm aware, there was an injury to Jeje, and he had to be taken out for this series, and Monkey came in to replace him. And ironically enough, that's when they're going to find their biggest success. It's kind of crazy to see see it end up the way that it has ended up. But, you know, nice win for EDG. And on the flip side of this for AL, what a disaster being the first team to lose to EDG. You were so hot. You looked so good for most of this week. To drop this series, it's definitely disappointing for a team that, you know, just a couple of days ago we were saying was pretty surefire in the playoffs at the current moment in the power rankings. And so we'll talk about them in a bit, but let's talk about EDG and what went right. It's just so clear that Ale is this organization's best player. He's going to get player of the series here, even when he was playing earlier on in the split. He had a couple of bad games, but for the most part, he was the only player actually trying on this team in the first couple of weeks. He gets benched because he's not practicing, because he really isn't showing any effort to scrim with the team, because he doesn't feel like it is worth it at this moment. And, you know, obviously that sucks. Like, that is, you know, a mental thing that you just wish you didn't have on a player as good as Ale, because you want to see buy-in from a player even when things aren't going right. It's, like, not fair to the teammates, but at the end of the day, he is the best player on this team, and so they got to play him anyways, and he comes back in, and he does dominate this series. 2 games of Cassante. Obviously, that champion is ridiculous, but Ale still piloted him at a very high level, and they don't win this series without him, even though it was, you know, a good series, I would say, from the rest of this team. Some of the best games that some of these other players have played, Ale still needed to be good in this series, and he was very, very good. Basically unstoppable by the time we got to the team fighting stage of any of these games, either of them. Game 1 or Game 2. Big credit to Monkey. Again, very limited time for him to be able to come in here and actually, you know, get ready to play on the LPL stage, take, you know, Jej's place, a world champion's place, and he did a phenomenal job. He was really good in this series. He was definitely the better jungler. Again, what we're seeing is that aggressive junglers in the LPL are just going to be able to generate more leads. The brand, and specifically the Graves, are very, very strong. Graves, Kindred, we're seeing the 2 marksmen really succeed in the jungle position right now. Something to keep note of for the LPL moving forward. But again, EDG was able to generate a lot of pressure, and they actually were just able to team fight a lot more successfully because they had more damage in the late game than a team like AL did with the setup that Xin Zhao offers. So something to keep in mind, but the Snake was fine in this series. This was really the first time where it was like, oh, you're not losing games for your team. You're just kind of surviving in laning phase. You did well to be able to generate your own individual advantages, but you were relevant in the late game, and that's all he really ever needed to be for this team. You need to take some of the pressure, some of the expectation off of him in the bot lane, and I think you did that here. Fisher continues to be good at not losing as hard as he did. I still don't think he's winning. His laning phases have just been a little bit more neutral, which I think is fine. Like, that's all you can really ask for, but you know, that was, again, kind of what you got in this series, a player who was neutral for most of the game and was able to capitalize on how strong the top side of the map was for him, and then Vampire was fine. You know, some of the engages were really good on the Alistar and the Nautilus. Some were also still very questionable. Doesn't change my opinion on Vampire. The rest of the team, again, was just in a better position to be able to capitalize, but it was Ale and it was Monkey. It was the 2 players that were coming in, and even the Snake, to an extent, that were kind of the standout players in this series, and it might be interesting. You might just run back this 5 for the rest of the split. You know, I'm sorry to Jeje, but he's really not playing all that well, and you know, this was the first time this team has looked interesting really at all. So we'll have to see if they continue to roll along with it. But for AL on the other side, disaster. I mean, being the first team to lose to EDG is certainly not the situation and the predicament you wanted to find yourself in. But I guess it could be worse. You at least almost played well in this series. Shanks was good. Hope was good. It was just kind of the peripheral pieces that weren't as good. Krako and Kale did not have a particularly good series. Krako's going to get my dud of the series, and I think a lot of their pressure actually does rely on these 2 in particular. I've been talking earlier in this week about how it's really nice to see them back together because I think they play off of each other well, but when they both aren't playing well, like, you know, they did in 2023, then you're really not going to get great performances out of this team, even when Shanks is stepping up and continuing to look really good in lane, going into a player in Fisher who's just playing very scared at the moment. And Hope, I think, was solid. Him and the Snake were basically the same this series, except the Snake had a better team around him in terms of the performances, and so that ended up being that. But the jungle diff was definitely there, and that's why Krako is going to get dead of the series. Kale could have been a bit better, although I don't think he was awful. Harry definitely was worse than Ale, but that's really not all that unexpected. Ale should absolutely be destroying Harry early on and later on in games. It's, you know, really not all that much of a shock to see that. AL just kind of lost this one, and obviously you would have liked to see them perform a bit better, but I don't want to freak out about them. This feels like a series that was a little bit out of left field for both of these teams. 2-0 was really not what I would have expected with, you know, AL playing the way that they did. I really don't think they got trounced in a lot of areas. You just wanted to see Krako and Kale play a bit better, maybe Harry survive a bit more on the top side, but I still think this team is in a pretty good spot, maybe not in as good of a spot as I would have thought earlier this week, but again, I don't want to freak out against this loss. It's just really nice to see EDG actually be able to win games, and it's really not something they've been able to do. They were 2-14 going into this series. Obviously, this is a massive win for them, but You want to see them continue this momentum. I don't really know what this lineup is going to look like once Jeja gets healthy. Do you even keep Jeja out? That would be a crazy decision, but it's certainly got to be on the table with how good Monkey played here. Whatever the case is, you're not going to go winless. No 0-16 team this split, which is a huge positive for EDG and probably a huge relief to a lot of these players. Then moving on to our second series of day number 8, and it's another kind of pseudo upset here as we saw Weibo Gaming taking on OMG. And OMG picks up a very important win. Weibo continuing the tradition of never really looking as good as they should, even when they start to climb people's, rankings. That's the moment that they start to look, a little bit more questionable. When they start to beat better teams, that's when they start to lose to, teams that are a bit more on the bubble. Not that OMG is a bad team, just that they really have not been an elite team at all, and Weibo Gaming absolutely should have been better than them, but, we should have seen this coming. It's a 2-1 series win for OMG. They looked very good in this series, and it's the same culprits that we have been praising all year long for OMG. Cube, Abel, PP God, they've been okay. They really have not been transcendent over the course of this split, but Zhao Feng and Angel have looked amazing, and they continue to look amazing in this series. It was honestly very difficult to determine a player of the series for me, because both of them were so good. In this one, Zhao Feng was definitely more of the carry, but I'm going to give player of the series to Angel because I felt like his proactivity was the reason that Zhao Feng was able to play as aggressive as he was able to do in this series. It was just really good stuff from a duo that is very, very much working. I know Angel is not somebody that gets a lot of credit from the community, but he has genuinely been terrific over the last year or so. Ever since he left RNG after the end of Spring Split, he was phenomenal for Ninjas in Pyjamas, was the best player on a team that overperformed and won a playoff series last year, if people forget, and now is here on OMG with a bunch of players that, are veterans, but are kind of underperforming and not really living up to their own individual standards, and he is pushing them forward alongside a rookie jungler that really didn't even have all that much time in the LDL to begin with, and so it's really hard not to give Angel a ton of credit for essentially just being this big team unlocker over the second half of his career here. Really nice to see it from him. He was amazing, definitely outplayed Xiaohu in laning phase. The karma was not it from Xiaohu in game number 2, in particular the Talia not looking nearly as good either. Angel was more proactive, he was a lot more aggressive in terms of the plays that he was making, and he really was the one to separate his own team from Weibo Gaming in terms of being able to generate those massive advantages. So big credit to Angel, but again, Zhao Feng also deserves a lot of credit here because his ability to take over games on Viego has to be studied. He is so good. He's an upper half jungler in the LPL already. He has genuinely been phenomenal over the course of this split. So many good young junglers, him, Milky Way coming into the split, or coming into the LPL this split. It's really fun to watch, but I honestly think you can make the argument that Zhao Feng is better as a jungler right now, and somebody that I'm looking at. I'm not going to say that, he gives me Zhao Hao vibes, but he gives me Zhao Hao vibes in terms of, what he could potentially become. That's really funny considering the matchup that he had in this series against Xiao Hao, where he was better. It's really, really cool to see. If jungle mid can continue to be a massive positive for OMG, they're going to be a playoff team, period, because this is one of the scarier jungle mid duos in the entire league at the current moment, especially in terms of the consistency that they have offered at the beginning of the spring split. The rest of the team was still good. Abel and PP God were a little bit more consistent here. They weren't exactly dominating lane phase, but they were playing things like Ezreal, Senna. They're really not meant to be dominating in that same way, and they were definitely more secondary pieces as the series went on, but you really just need them to be good enough in terms of what they played like over the beginning part of this year. And then Cube had one of his better weeks in a while. He has been really awful for OMG to start the year, but week 4 was definitely a little bit more of the Cube that we kind of became accustomed to. He did play some weaker competition, like ZDZ's not the best laner in the entire world, certainly not a dominant top laner, but he is good enough to be able to go up against a player like Cube, and ZDZ has been better over the beginning part of the spring split, and so to see Cube actually step up, play something like Camille into Cassante, and just generally actually be useful in the game, it's really good to see, and you're really hoping that that's going to be something that they can continue through the next couple of weeks. But obviously for Weibo on the other side, this is not a good loss. You really just got to be more consistent than this. And I understand that with the players that you have on this team, there is just an inherent level of variance because Xiaohu is very variant. He's going to have good games and bad games. Xiao Hao and ZDZ aren't exactly the most consistent players in the entire world. It's why they had never made the playoffs as a duo. But you got to be better than this. If you want to be a top 5 team, which I think is pretty wide open in the LPL right now, you do have to be better than this, and they just weren't. Xiaohu's going to get done to the series. That's really obvious. obvious in this one. He cannot play Karma. Like, I get Karma's really strong. I get that this is a champion that I advocate a lot for on this channel, but if you can't play it, don't play it. I get that mid lane has kind of become more of a supportive role, specifically in the LPL, to allow the junglers to play more aggressive, to allow your bot laners a little bit more opportunity to get resources early on in games, but that's just not who Xiaohu is. Get him on Azir, get him on Corki, you know, get him on these champions where he can scale into the late game, be a really proactive team fighter, and let him do that. This is just not the playstyle that he is going to succeed on nearly as much as others. He's never been a low resource mid laner, even in his best days. It's never really been something that he excels on. I think this is just not a good draft from Weibo coaches, although Xiaohu does absolutely need to be better. I'm not taking all of the blame away from him, but I think he was put in a position to fail in this one, and then it's not like the rest of the team played better. Xiao Hao really has not been the player that we expected him to be on Weibo. It's been a very slow start to the year. I love Xiao Hao. Again, one of the biggest channel darlings I've had, but he's really not been that takeover threat now that he's actually on a good team. I hope this is just the beginning of a split. I hope he starts to ramp up. He's always been more of a summer split player, kind of the opposite of Xiaohu in that regard, where summer is really where he starts to pop off. He did it last year. He did it in 2022 as well. Hopefully that carries over for Weibo, but maybe you want to see a bit more consistency from him in the spring before you just say that. And ZDZ is really just a guy in the top side. You really wanted to see him beat Cube, and he just wasn't able to do that here. Light and Crisp were fine. Crisp is still very good for this team and creating a lot of plays for them on these enchanters. It's just never going to be enough. He's very good at Ashe, but if the rest of the team isn't there to follow up, if mid lane has already lost so hard, there's really only so much you can do. From the support position, I think Weibo is a good team. They're just going to be very inconsistent, and like I said, the top of the standings, basically, you know, numbers 5 to whatever, like 17, honestly, ironically enough, are so open. They're so variable that, you know, Weibo really needed this win to kind of solidify themselves, and they just weren't able to get it, and that's definitely going to be frustrating, but it is a very important win for OMG. This probably keeps them in the playoff race, not in terms of standings. They're obviously already in it in terms of standings, but in terms of, you know, perception and rankings, I think this puts them in a pretty decent spot. Zhao Feng and Angel really are popping off. If their bot lane can get anywhere near what they were last year, this is actually going to be a very good team. It's just not quite there yet right now for me. And then moving on to our third series of day number 8, the final series of the week here, and it was definitely a good one between Ninjas in Pyjamas and LNG Esports, where Ninjas in Pyjamas is going to pick up a very important win. LNG goes 0-3 in week number 4 after Lunar New Year. They dropped to 2-6 to start the year. It's not good. I mean, it is really, really not good for them right now. Their problems are very much getting exposed, and there's really no other way to say it. This is not a good League of Legends team in their current state. You know, they're going to be a playoff team again. I want to reiterate, I want to make this point abundantly clear. Their schedule has been ridiculously hard. They basically only played the best teams in the league to start the year, and so 2-6 isn't great, but you know what they're not is a top 5 or top 6 team in the LPL. They're just not in their current state. They have so many problems. They have anti-synergy in terms of their players, and a team like NIP that actually is good, that plays off of each other well, that, you know, shout out to Reddit, has said is going to fall apart any day now, that continuously doesn't fall apart. Like, they're going to be able to capitalize and take advantage of the mistakes that LNG are making in the back half of the series, and that's exactly what they did. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series, no brainer, gonna go to Shanji. 3 games of Kashanji in this one, and that's really what you want to see. Not really sure why LNG let that through for 3 straight games. This is his best champion. I get that he's got signature champions. He's got the Rumble. He's got the Shyvana top, right? He's got things that we know a bit more from him from his OMG days, where he's got these crazy, wild, wacky picks, but it's really the Cassante that he has been dominating on in terms of meta picks over the past year, and to allow him to have it all 3 games and to get destroyed by it in game 2 and then just to pick the same matchup in game number 3, it's very intriguing. Zika definitely tried his best, especially in that second game where he played very well, but there's only so much you can do to shut down a player who's on a champion they're very comfortable on. That champion's very strong, and that player is very good. And that's exactly what happened here. This is his best series on Ninjas in Pyjamas, in my opinion. And moving them to 7-1, it's a really good spot to be in. I really want to give a big shout out to Rookie as well, who's just been genuinely, like, sensational over the course of this year up until this point. He's not going to get the credit that he deserves. I really don't know why people tend to actually scapegoat Rookie a bit more than maybe you would expect. I don't know if it's just because LPL fans love calling players washed, almost as much as they love using the term ELO held. Shout out both LPL and LCK fans for using that term basically as a non sequitur. But Rookie's been amazing this split. Truly one of the best players players in the LPL. Absolutely in the MVP race, especially with NIP at 7-1. Really nice to see him play well again here. I thought Fodic was actually pretty good. I know his scoreline doesn't look great, but he was very useful, especially in that second game on the Senna. His ability to actually survive in like really weak side situations was very crucial towards what NIP were doing. Again, it does feel like he is really starting to develop a very well-rounded game, which is just something he has never had, even when he was succeeding on, Victory 5 a couple of years ago. I think Zhuo gets a lot more hate than he deserves, although he wasn't perfect here, and Aki wasn't perfect either, definitely engaged a little bit more aggressively than maybe I would have liked, but he was certainly the better jungler in the back half of this series, which there isn't a lot to complain about. But it was the solo laners and even Fodic to an extent that I think really pushed NIP over the top. Don't give him Cassante 3 games in a row. That's my advice to teams playing NIP. But for LNG on the other side, I mean, what can I say? I've spent 2 segments of this video already saying basically everything I want to say about LNG. Weiwei's done of the series here. He has no synergy with the rest of this roster. They do not play off of him in any particularly good way. Game 1 was pretty good. Like, the Xin Zhao looked very solid in that first game. You had Scout playing off him well. I thought Zika actually played game number 2 incredibly well, even if he got destroyed in that third game and allowed Shanji to really snowball it out of control. I don't even necessarily think this series was entirely his fault, but you see a lot of people on Reddit being like, I don't know what happened to Weiwei. He was so good last year and he fell off. First of all, I was a lot lower on Weiwei's regular season. I think anybody who watched the regular season and not just Worlds would have known that Weiwei was very inconsistent as a player. He didn't exactly have great game-to-game upside. He was more of a negative in the regular season than he was a positive for Weibo. He just had a pretty good World Championships, and I say that he was the weakest part of that team up until the finals at Worlds. And, he goes over here to LNG and, nobody talks about fit. Nobody talks about synergy. Nobody talks about playstyle. And that's why, I want this channel to be kind of more about that, right? Is I want to talk about the things that I truly think are being under-discussed in these communities. And Weiwei plus Scout is just bad synergy. I know I'm harping on the topic because I've said it in 2 segments already, but you can't have one of the most aggressive junglers in the entire league with one of the more control-oriented passive mid laners in the entire league and expect things to just go your way. Weiwei is going for a lot of these plays early, and now he's changing his style. He's being a lot more inactive in the early game, and that's not playing towards Weiwei's strengths. It's just not going to work out with these guys on this team. I think they're talented enough to be able to beat teams that are bad, teams that are, bottom 5, bottom 6 teams in the league. I think they will be a playoff team, but I really don't expect a lot more from this roster, especially after this 0-3 week. It was a disaster for them. Really nothing else to say. I do like that Hong is back in here. I think that's made Gala play a bit better. He clearly did not look all that comfortable playing with Mark. That was another playstyle clash. I think Hong probably should start the rest of the year. And like I said, Zika had a couple of good moments, specifically game number 2 here, but this team is never going to win if mid-jungle are not on the same page, and especially when their drafts are as bad as they have been. There's really just not a lot of good to talk about with LNG. This is one of the lower tier playoff teams at the moment, and that is incredibly disappointing. And then for NIP, again, this is a very good team. People are going to continuously talk about their downfall. Do I think they're a top 3 team? Do I think they're in the same tier as Bilibili, JD Gaming, and Top Esports? I don't think that. I don't think they're in the same tier as them, but I do think they are clearly the best of the rest. When you have teams like LNG and Weibo Gaming and OMG fighting it out for that number 5 spot, yeah, NIP is very, very clearly better than those teams in their current state. So I do feel good about this roster. Hopefully Rookie can continue to be this mega carry, and if, topside can continue to be strong, if bot lane steps up, NIP could continue to even grow throughout the year, which would be massive for them. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Week 4 overview and analysis video. Thank you again for sticking around so long. This is going to be the longest video I make all year. This is the longest week in the LPL all year, and so I really do appreciate you guys sticking around for it. Of course, up on the screen now, you're going to see the updated standings after 4 weeks of action here in the LPL. Of course, left side's going to be the playoff line, so top 10 are kind of locked in right now, at least in terms of how they are performing. And then you've got the right side, which are the non-playoff teams. In the first column to the right of each team, you can see the personal power rankings I have for each of these teams from number 1 to number 17. In the second column, you can see how those have changed from last week to this week. We can go over the risers and the fallers here. Top 4 is going to stay the same. I don't think anybody's really going to be all that upset by that. Bilibili, JD Gaming, Top Esports, Ninjas, and Pyjamas. They're the top 4 teams in the LPL right now, and to me, it's pretty clear that they are in that order. But everything else is going to change. Coming in at number 5, moving up 2 spots, it's Team WE. Yeah, I'm shocked about that as well. Do I think they're a top 5 team in the LPL? I don't think they should be, but I think at the moment they are. There's just nobody else around them that I feel better about than them. Maybe you move Weibo up to this spot. They're going to stay at number 6. Maybe you move Weibo up just because you don't think that their loss at the end of the week is all that, crazy, and maybe you think this team's going to get better as the year goes on, or that maybe when games start to matter more, they're going to step it up. Maybe that's the case. They've always been a bit more interesting in terms of the playoffs, but at least right now, I trust WE more than I trust Weibo Gaming, and so they move up to number 5. Weibo moves up to number 6. Number 7 is going to be OMG. Again, I don't feel good about having them this high in the standings, but who else are you going to put ahead of them? I think very realistically, you could have Invictus Gaming at number 7, and you could have OMG at number 8. If you wanted to switch those two around, I think that that's totally fine. They're pretty close teams in terms of my perception at the current moment. If Leon can continue to play the way that he has, this team might skyrocket into the top 6. But for now, they're going to stay. They're going to move up to number 8, and OMG is going to move up to number 7. And falling all the way down to number 9 is LNG. Some people might want to see them fall even further. They're 2-6. They've lost their last 5 series in a row. They're really not in a good spot, but they basically only played top-tier teams in that stretch. I expect them to look better against the middle of the pack, and I expect them to settle in around this number 9 spot, but I just can't justify putting them any higher than that right now. And coming in the final playoff spot for me, it is going to be anyone's legend, coming in at number 10. Yes, the loss at the end of the week to EDG is not super encouraging, but you have to imagine that is more of an outlier than it is a good performance. They were generally very good across this entire week, enough so for me to put them into my top 10. FPX comes in very close at number 11. They move up 2 spots. They are looking pretty solid. I don't know if they're going to be a playoff team, but they're at the very least in the running at the current moment, especially with teams like LNG very much underperforming. I think, if they continue to just fall off a cliff, a team like FPX could definitely swoop in and take that final playoff spot. But coming in at number 12 for me, it's going to be LGD. Yeah, this team's all the way up at number 12 in the power rankings. They've actually been pretty good. I really trust Haichao and how he's playing right now. Meteor's a solid player. I think if they can just get average performances out of their bot lane, they're going to be good enough to win games. I like Bertle more than your average analyst. I think this is a solid team, and, everybody else below them is not good. RNG falls to 13. This is one of the worst teams in the LPL right now. I really don't even think I have to explain it that much. Thunder Talk going to drop to 14 as well. This team is not working. Beishuan is playing really bad. Hoya is the worst top laner in the LPL. Even if Yucal is good, and even if maybe there's upside towards this bot lane, and Chocho played better towards the end of the week, it's just not coming together on a game-to-game basis. This is not a very good team right now. They're going to fall to 14. Ultra Prime staying at 15. Maybe you can move them up. I mean, somehow they've lost a bunch of series, but they've at least looked competitive in those series, which is more than you can say. But Rare Adam moving up to 16. They're not dead last anymore. 2 wins this week are definitely a positive for them. They are out of the winless column, and the same thing can be said for number 17 in EDG. I just feel very confident that at least until proven otherwise, EDG is still the worst team in the LPL, their win notwithstanding. And so those are my power rankings. A lot of changes this week, more than any other week. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below of the changes. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Who's too high? Who's too low? Would love to know your thoughts and feedback. Of course, it's time to move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 4, the big super week here in the LPL. Player of the week for me is going to go to Rookie, the mid laner for Ninjas in Pyjamas. This team was awesome this week, 3-0, looking really solid, and Rookie is the biggest reason for that. He has really been dominant for this team across this split. Definitely an MVP contender. Really liking the bounce back that he had. He really didn't click with Top Esports last year, but seeing him back here on an organization that he clearly wants to play for, making the talent around him better, that's what Rookie is best known for. I'm really liking what we're seeing out of him in 2024. Runners up, Shanks, the mid laner for Anyone's Legend. Great week up until that EDG series. Even then, he still was definitely the better mid laner across that series. He is just really starting to come alive and really starting to come on very quickly, in the middle of this split here. Hopefully he can keep that up to keep AL in the playoff race. And then Milky Way, the jungler for FPX. The team generally looked very good this week, and as rookie junglers go, he was probably the best this week, although another honorable mention could theoretically be Zhao Feng, the jungler for OMG, who was also very good across this week. I think you can also give shouts to Tian and 369 of Top Esports, who were very good. I just think that Rookie, Shanks, and Milky Way were the most impressive for me in terms of player of the week, Rookie getting the official honor. And then dud of the week for me, obvious, this is no-brainer, it's going to go to Weiwei. 0-3 LNG, this team is collapsing, and he is playing incredibly poorly. Yes, he's looking good in some of these games, he's looking good, in individual one-offs, but throughout an entire series, he just can't seem to be consistent, and a lot of that is the bad synergy that I've talked about with the rest of his teammates here. So pretty easy choice for dud of the week in week 4. I think you could give it to his teammate Scout, who was also really, really bad this week. I think you could give it to Decade, who's just not an LPL caliber top laner for Ultra Prime, or Breathe, who had the worst week that he has had all year long by a large margin on RNG. But to me, Weiwei was pretty easily the candidate here to get dud of the week in week number 4. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Again, thank you so much for sticking around for this over 2-hour long video. So much to cover in the LPL, but I do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. I know this video is coming out late, a day late, but there's only so much time in the day to watch these games, and so so it does have to come out a bit late. I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and hit that subscribe to kind of further, push this video in the algorithm. It really does help out a lot. Of course, we don't only cover the LPL on this channel. We cover all 4 of the major regions. The LCK video is actually going to get double uploaded today, so I hope you guys are excited for that. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.